Hello everyone, I am the narrator, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The headlights behind me hadn't moved for the last hour. At first I dismissed it as coincidence after all. How many roads lead out of the city at 2 a.m.? But as the miles stretched on and the lights remained fixed in my rearview mirror, a chill began to creep up my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The monotonous hum of the road had long since faded into the background, replaced by the thundering of my own heartbeat in my ears. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my eyes kept darting back to the mirror, watching those unwavering lights. It had been a long day. I'd stayed late at the office, finishing up a project that couldn't wait until morning. By the time I left, the city streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional taxi or late-night reveler. I'd welcomed the quiet drive home, looking forward to crawling into bed and forgetting about deadlines and demanding clients. Now, as I sped down the highway, that solitude felt oppressive. The darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by the glow of my dashboard and those persistent headlights behind me. I fumbled for the radio, desperate for some noise to fill the silence. Static crackled through the speakers, punctuated by fragments of late-night talk shows and country music. I left it on, preferring the disjointed chatter to the deafening quiet. I considered pulling over, letting the car pass me, but something held me back. What if they didn't pass? What if they stopped too? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me, and I pressed down harder on the accelerator. The speedometer crept up, 70, 75, 80 miles per hour. The headlights kept pace effortlessly. My hands were slick with sweat now, slipping on the wheel as I took a curve too fast. The tires squealed in protest, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I might lose control. But the car held the road, and I let out a shaky breath. I needed to calm down. I was letting my imagination run wild. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. Maybe they were just heading to the same place I was. Maybe they were as scared of me as I was of them. Maybe. A flash of red and blue in my rearview mirror cut through my rationalizations. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a car behind me, it was a police car. Relief and embarrassment washed over me in equal measure. Of course it was the police. They'd probably clocked me speeding and were waiting for a safe place to pull me over. I eased my foot off the gas, looking for a good spot to stop. Up ahead, I saw a sign for a rest area. Perfect. I'd pull in there, take my ticket, and be on my way. This whole ordeal would make for a funny story tomorrow. The rest area was deserted when I pulled in, my tires crunching on the gravel. I parked near the entrance bus under the harsh glow of a flickering streetlight. In my mirror, I watched the police car pull in behind me, blocking my exit. I took a deep breath, reaching for my license and registration, but the police car door didn't open. The lights stayed on, casting eerie shadows across the empty lot. I waited, my heart rate picking up again. Why weren't they getting out? I turned in my seat, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. There was no one in the driver's seat of the police car. The cab was empty. Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't possible. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things, but when I opened my eyes, the scene remained unchanged. An empty police car, lights flashing, blocking my only way out. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had the officer gotten out without me noticing? Were they approaching my car now? I scanned the area but saw no movement in the shadows. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call for help. But as the screen lit up, my heart sank. No signal. Of course, I was miles from anywhere, alone in a deserted rest stop with a ghost car. A sound to my left made me jump. I whipped my head around, searching for the source. There, at the edge of the light, I saw a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like a police uniform. Relief flooded through me. There was an officer after all. This was all just a misunderstanding. I rolled down my window, ready to explain myself, but as the figure stepped closer, the words died in my throat. This was no police officer. The uniform was right, but everything else was wrong. The face was hidden in shadow, but I could see that the proportions were off. The arms were too long, the gait too jerky and unnatural. I fumbled for the window control, desperate to close it. But before I could, a hand shot out, gripping the frame. It was pale, almost translucent, with long fingers that ended in sharp, blackened nails. A low, guttural sound emerged from the figure, something between a growl and a laugh. Panic took over. I jammed the key in the ignition, not caring about the consequences. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun on the gravel, kicking up stones. The hand on my window tightened, leaving deep scratches in the paint. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was stuck, but then the tires found purchase, and the car shot backward. There was a horrible screech as the creature's hand was torn away from the window. I didn't look to see if I'd hit it. I just kept going, swerving around the empty police car and back onto the highway. I drove like I'd never driven before, pushing my old sedan to its limits. The speedometer needle trembled past 90, past 100. The world outside became a blur of darkness and scattered lights. I kept expecting to see those flashing lights appear behind me again, but the road remained empty. It wasn't until I saw the familiar skyline of the city that I finally began to slow down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. Sweat had soaked through my shirt, leaving me chilled in the night air. I pulled into the first 24-hour gas station I saw, parking under the bright fluorescent lights. For a long time, I just sat there, engine idling, trying to process what had happened. Had it been real? Or had I dozed off at the wheel, conjuring up a nightmare from my overtired mind? Slowly I got out of the car. My legs felt weak, barely able to support me. I walked around to the driver's side, dreading what I might find. And there they were, 4 deep gouges in the paint, right where the window met the door. Undeniable proof that something had tried to get in. I sank to the ground, my back against the car, and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A concerned attendant came out to check on me, probably thinking I was drunk or high. I waved him off, not even knowing how to begin explaining what had happened. When I finally felt steady enough to drive again, I headed straight home. I double-checked every lock, closed every curtain, and huddled under my blankets like a child afraid of the dark. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale hand reaching for me. As the first light of dawn began to filter through my windows, I made a decision. I called in sick to work, packed a bag, and booked a flight to visit my parents. I needed to get away, to be somewhere familiar and safe while I figured out what to do next. But as I drove to the airport, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit, I knew one thing for certain. I would never drive alone at night again. The darkness held too many secrets, too many things that defied explanation, and somewhere out there, on a lonely stretch of highway, something was waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to come along, unaware of the terror that lurked in the shadows. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I've become hyper-vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, always looking for potential threats. Friends have noticed, commenting on my newfound paranoia. But how can I explain it to them? How can I make them understand the fear that now lives in my bones, the knowledge that the world is not what we think it is? Sometimes, late at night, I find myself drawn to the window, peering out at the empty street below, and in those moments, I swear I can see a figure in the distance, standing just beyond the reach of the streetlights, waiting, watching, reminding me that no matter how far I run, no matter how safe I think I am, the night will always be there, and with it, the memory of that terrifying drive and the creature that almost caught me. The forest had swallowed the trail an hour ago, but I kept pushing forward. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar terrain, I realized I was hopelessly lost. That's when I saw it, a flicker of light in the distance, promising shelter from the encroaching darkness. Little did I know, I was walking straight into a nightmare. My boots crunched on the carpet of pine needles as I made my way towards the light. The day had started so perfectly. Clear skies, a well-marked trail, and the promise of breathtaking views at the summit. I'd told myself this solo hike was just what I needed to clear my head after weeks of stress at work. Now, as the temperature dropped and the forest grew darker, I cursed my overconfidence. I'd veered off the main path hours ago, lured by what I thought was a shortcut. By the time I realized my mistake, the familiar markers had disappeared, replaced by dense underbrush and towering trees that all looked the same in the fading light. My phone had lost signal long ago, the map app useless without a connection. I was on my own. The light grew stronger as I approached, and I could make out the shape of a small cabin nestled in a clearing. Relief flooded through me. Even if no one was home, it would provide shelter for the night. I could figure out my way back in the morning. As I drew closer, details emerged from the gloom. The cabin was old, its wooden walls weathered in grey. A small porch sagged slightly under the weight of years, but warm light spilled from the windows, and I could see smoke curling from the chimney. Someone was home. I paused at the edge of the clearing, suddenly hesitant. There was something off about the scene, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the absolute silence, no birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. Or maybe it was the way the light from the windows seemed to flicker and dance, as if from a fire rather than electric bulbs. My survival instincts warred with my desperation for shelter. In the end, desperation won out. I took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, making my way to the front door. The porch creaked ominously under my weight as I raised my hand to knock. Before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. A man stood there, backlit by the warm glow from inside. He was tall and lean, with a scraggly beard and piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Well now," he said, his voice rough as if from disuse. "What brings you to our neck of the woods?" I swallowed hard, fighting down a surge of unease. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I got lost on the trail and saw your light. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for help, or maybe get directions back to the main road." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but then his face broke into a wide grin. Of course, can't leave a fellow traveler out in the cold. Come on in." He stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped over the threshold. The interior of the cabin was sparse but cozy, dominated by a large fireplace where flames danced merrily. A few pieces of rustic furniture were scattered around, and I could see a small kitchenette in one corner. "Have a seat," the man said, pointing to a worn armchair near the fire. "Warm yourself up. I'll see about that phone for you." I sank into the chair gratefully, feeling the heat from the fire chase away the chill that had settled into my bones. As the man disappeared into another room, I took the opportunity to look around more closely. Something felt off about the cabin's interior, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The furnishings looked old, almost antique, but well maintained. There were no personal touches though, no photos, no knickknacks, nothing to suggest someone actually lived here. My eyes fell on a small table near the door. A collection of odd items was spread across its surface. A tarnished pocket watch, a handful of what looked like old coins, a smudged pair of glasses. They looked like the sort of things you'd find in the pockets of. A chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the cool night air outside. These were personal effects, but they didn't belong to the cabin's owner. They were trophies. The sound of footsteps made me turn. The man had returned, but he wasn't alone. Two other figures followed him into the room, both men with the same lean, hungry look as their companion. "No luck with the phone, I'm afraid," the first man said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Seems the storm last week knocked out the lines. They haven't been repaired yet." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "That's okay," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "If you could just point me in the direction of the main road, I'll be on my way." The three men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then the first man spoke again, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Now why would we do that? It's been so long since we've had a guest." I backed away, looking frantically for an escape route. But they had positioned themselves between me and the door. I was trapped. "What do you want?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. The man's grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Why, we want you to stay, of course, forever." They moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I lashed out blindly, my fist connecting with one man's jaw. He stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, and I used the moment of confusion to make a break for it. I dove past them, yanking the door open and plunging into the night. Behind me, I could hear shouts of anger, followed by the sound of pursuit. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. The forest was pitch black now, the trees looming like silent sentinels on all sides. More than once I stumbled, only to scramble back to my feet and keep running. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I didn't slow down. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, finally collapsing against a tree, gulping in great lungfuls of air. As my racing heart began to slow, I strained my ears for any sign that I was still being followed. The forest was silent, save for the pounding of blood in my ears. Had I lost them, Or were they out there still, watching, waiting? I stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. Gradually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me exhausted and shivering in the cool night air. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find my way out of this forest before they found me again. With aching muscles protesting every movement, I pushed myself to my feet. The sky had begun to lighten, the first grey hints of dawn breaking through the canopy above. With the growing light came a surge of hope. I could do this. I could survive this. I picked a direction at random and started walking, keeping my ears tuned for any sound of pursuit. As I walked, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who were those men? What did they want with me? The questions tumbled over each other, each more terrifying than the last. It was mid-morning when I finally broke free of the tree line. Stumbling onto a paved road, I nearly wept with relief at the sight. A passing motorist took pity on me, giving me a ride to the nearest town, where I immediately went to the police. They listened to my story with skeptical expressions, but agreed to send a team to investigate the cabin. They came back empty-handed. There was no cabin, they said. No clearing, no sign that anyone had lived in that part of the decades. I've tried to put that night behind me, to convince myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see those men, still hear their voices, still feel the terror of being hunted through the dark forest. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I can see something in my eyes, something hungry, something that doesn't belong. And I wonder, did I really escape that night? Or did a part of me stay behind in that cabin, replaced by something else? Something that followed me home from those dark woods? I don't go hiking anymore. I avoid forests altogether. But no matter how far I run, no matter how brightly lit the city streets are, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the depths of the wilderness, 3 men are waiting. Waiting for me to lose my way again, waiting to welcome me home. The first thump from upstairs made me pause the movie. The second sent chills down my spine. By the third, I knew something was terribly wrong in this house. I was supposed to be watching the kids, but now I wasn't sure if they were even in their beds anymore. I'd been babysitting for the Millers for about 6 months now. They were good people, always paid on time, and their kids, Emma, 8, and Liam, 6, were generally well behaved. Tonight was supposed to be like any other night. Mr. and Mrs. Miller had gone out for their monthly date night, leaving me in charge until around midnight. The evening had started normally enough. I'd made mac and cheese for dinner, the kids' favorite, supervised bath time, and then tucked them into bed with a story. By 9 p.m., the house was quiet, and I'd settled onto the couch with some homework and the TV for background noise. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs, like something heavy falling onto carpet. I muted the TV, listening intently. For a few moments, there was nothing but silence. I was about to chalk it up to my imagination when I heard it again, louder this time. My heart began to race. It could be nothing, I told myself. Maybe one of the kids had gotten up to use the bathroom, or perhaps it was just the house settling. Old houses made weird noises all the time, right? But then came the third thump, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Heavy footsteps, not the light patter of children's feet. I stood up slowly, my textbook falling forgotten to the floor. "Emma? Liam?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay up there?" No response, just more silence. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had to check on the kids. It was my job after all. But as I approached the stairs, every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. I ignored the voice of fear and began to climb, each step creaking under my weight. The upstairs hallway was dark, shadows stretching ominously from the nightlight plugged into the wall. I made my way to Emma's room first, pushing the door open slowly. "Emma," I whispered, peering into the darkness. My hand fumbled for the light switch, and I blinked as the room was suddenly illuminated. The bed was empty, covers thrown back as if she'd left in a hurry. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear she'd never slept without, lying on the floor. Panic rising, I rushed to Liam's room next door. The scene was the same, an empty bed, rumpled sheets. No sign of the little boy who should have been sleeping soundly. "Emma? Liam?" I called out, no longer caring about keeping quiet. "Where are you?" The house remained silent, mocking my growing fear. I checked the bathroom, finding it empty, then the guest room, the closets, even under the beds. Nothing. As I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what to do next, I heard another noise. This time, it was coming from downstairs, a soft scraping sound, like furniture being moved. My mind raced. Had someone broken in and taken the kids? Were they still in the house? Should I call the police? What would I tell the Millers? I crept back downstairs, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. 911 pre-dialed and ready to call. The scraping sound had stopped, but now I could hear something else, a low, rhythmic humming. It was coming from the kitchen. I inched closer, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was in there would hear it. As I reached the doorway, I took a deep breath and peered around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. Emma and Liam were there, but they weren't alone. They stood hand in hand with a figure I can only describe as wrong. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, too thin, bending at odd angles. And its face. God, its face. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, interrupted by a wide, tooth-filled grin that stretched from ear to ear. The creature was swaying gently, humming that eerie tune, and the children swayed with it, their eyes glassy and unfocused. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure, because suddenly that featureless face turned towards me. The grin widened, if that was even possible, and it raised one long-fingered hand in a grotesque parody of a wave. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, out the front door and into the street, screaming for help. Lights came on in neighboring houses, curious and concerned faces appearing in windows, but I couldn't stop. Couldn't explain. All I could do was run and scream. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have vague memories of police cars, of trying to explain what I'd seen to skeptical officers, of the Millers rushing home, their faces pale with worry, of the frantic search of the house that turned up nothing, no creature, no sign of a break-in, and most disturbingly, no Emma and Liam. The days that followed were a blur of questioning and accusations. The police suspected me at first, the babysitter who conveniently lost the kids she was supposed to be watching. But there was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. It was as if Emma and Liam had simply vanished into thin air. The Millers didn't blame me, at least not openly, but I could see it in their eyes. The unspoken question, how could you let this happen? Weeks turned into months. The search for Emma and Liam continued, but hope dwindled with each passing day. I tried to move on with my life, to forget that terrible night, but the memories haunted me. The sound of that humming, the sight of that grinning, featureless face, they followed me into my dreams, turning them into nightmares. I stopped babysitting. I couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for someone else's children, not after what had happened. I threw myself into my studies, trying to drown out the guilt and fear with academic pursuits. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the shadows grew long, I'd find myself listening for that soft thump, that eerie hum, wondering if the creature would come for me next. It was almost a year later when it happened. I was home alone, studying for finals, when I heard it, that familiar thump from upstairs. My blood ran cold, memories of that night flooding back. For a long moment, I sat frozen, unable to move. Then, slowly, I stood up. I knew I should run, should call for help, but a part of me needed to know, needed to see. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like it took an eternity. The upstairs hallway was dark, just like that night. But this time, there was a faint glow coming from under my bedroom door. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated for a moment, then steeled myself and pushed the door open. There, in the center of my room, stood Emma and Liam. They looked exactly as they had a year ago, not a day older, and behind them, its long arms draped over their shoulders, was the creature. It raised its head as I entered, that terrible grin spreading across its featureless face. And then, in a voice that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind, it said, "We've been waiting for you. It's time to come home." Emma and Liam turned to me, their eyes still glassy and unfocused. They reached out their hands, inviting me to join them, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything but give in, I felt my feet moving forward. As I took their hands, the creature's grin widened impossibly. The room began to fade away, replaced by swirling darkness. The last thing I remember is the sound of that eerie humming, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. I woke up in my bed the next morning, convinced it had all been a terrible nightmare. But as I got up, I noticed something on my nightstand that made my blood run cold. A small, worn teddy bear. Emma's teddy bear. I don't babysit anymore. I don't sleep with the lights off, and every night I lie awake, listening for that soft thump, that eerie hum, wondering when the creature will return, wondering if, next time, I'll have the strength to resist its call, because deep down I know the truth. It's not a matter of if, but when, and when it comes, I'm not sure I'll be able to say no. The first sign of trouble was the too wide smile of the gas station attendant. The second was the way the entire town seemed to go quiet as we drove through. By the time we realized something was terribly wrong, it was already too late to leave. My wife and Sarah and I had been on the road for hours. We were on our way to her sister's wedding, cutting through back roads to avoid highway traffic. It had been Sarah's idea, a chance to see some of the country's hidden gems, she'd said. Now, as our car sputtered and died on the outskirts of a town I couldn't even name, I was beginning to regret agreeing to her plan. "This can't be happening," Sarah groaned, her head thudding against the headrest. We're going to miss the rehearsal dinner." I tried to start the car again, but the engine just wheezed pathetically. "Let's not panic," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There's a town just up ahead. We'll get some help and be back on the road in no time." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded. We got out and started pushing the car towards the town. The late afternoon sun beat down on us, and by the time we reached the quiet "Welcome to Millbrook" sign, we were both sweating and irritable. The town itself looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. All quaint storefronts and neatly trimmed lawns, but there was something off about it. The streets were empty, despite it being barely past 5 p.m. The only sound was the crunch of our shoes on the pavement and the distant bark of a dog. We pushed the car to a gas station on the corner of Main Street. A bell jingled as we entered the attached convenience store, and a man behind the counter looked up. His smile was immediate and wide, too wide, stretching his face in a way that made my skin crawl. "Well, hello there, strangers," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "Welcome to Millbrook. What can I do for you folks today?" I explained about our car trouble, and his grin, impossibly, widened further. "Oh, that's no problem at all. Our town mechanic, old Bill, he can fix anything with an engine. Why don't you folks have a seat and I'll give him a call?" We sat in plastic chairs by the window, watching as the attendant made his call. Outside, I noticed a few people had appeared on the street. They all seemed to be looking our way, their faces bearing the same unsettling smiles as the attendant. "Is it just me?" Sarah whispered. "Or is something weird about this place?" Before I could answer, the attendant was back. "Good news. Bill's on his way. Should be here in about an hour. Why don't you folks take a walk around town while you wait? Millbrook's got some real nice sights." We thanked him and stepped outside, both of us eager to get some fresh air. As we walked down Main Street, more people appeared. They all greeted us enthusiastically, their smiles wide and unwavering. "Welcome to Millbrook," a woman called from her porch. "Hope you folks are enjoying your stay," a man shouted from across the street. It was friendly, sure, but there was an intensity to it that set my nerves on edge, and the smiles, those unchanging, too wide smiles, were starting to make me feel dizzy. We turned a corner and found ourselves in a small park. A group of children were playing on a rusty swing set, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the quiet town. As we passed, they all stopped and turned to us in unison, their faces splitting into those same eerie grins. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, "I think we should head back to the gas station." She nodded, her face pale. We turned around, only to find our path blocked by a group of townspeople. They were all smiling, all staring at us with an intensity that made my heart race. "Now, where are you folks off to in such a hurry?" one of them asked, his voice syrupy sweet. "The fun's just getting started." We backed away, but more people were appearing from all directions, hemming us in. Their smiles never faltered, even as their eyes grew cold and predatory. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Why?" "We want you to stay," a woman chirped. "Millbrook's always looking for new residents, and you two look like you'd fit right in." Sarah grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. I could feel her trembling. "That's very kind," I said, forcing a smile of my own, "but we really need to get going. My sister-in-law's wedding, you see." The crowd's smiles widened, and I swear I heard joints popping from the strain. "Oh, but we insist," the first man said. Millbrook's the kind of place you never want to leave. Isn't that right, folks? A chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd, the sound unnaturally in sync. They began to move closer, their hands outstretched as if to grab us. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Sarah's arm and yelled, "Run!" We took off, pushing through the crowd, hands grasped at our clothes, trying to hold us back, but somehow we broke free. We ran down unfamiliar streets, the sound of pursuit close behind. The entire town seemed to have come alive, all of them chasing us with those horrible, unchanging smiles. We turned a corner and found ourselves back on Main Street. Our car was still at the gas station, and to my shock, it looked like it had been fixed. The hood was closed, and I could see the keys in the ignition. "The car," Sarah gasped. "We can make it." We sprinted towards it, the sounds of the townspeople growing closer. Just as we reached the car, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned to see the gas station attendant, his smile now a rictus of fury. "Now that's not very neighborly," he snarled, trying to leave without saying goodbye. I shoved him away and dove into the driver's seat. Sarah was already in, slamming her door shut. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. The townspeople had surrounded the car, their hands beating against the windows, those terrible smiles still plastered on their faces. I threw the car into reverse, not caring if I hit anyone. They fell back as I peeled out of the gas station and onto the road. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing in the middle of the street watching us go. Their smiles never faltered, even as they grew smaller in the distance. We drove in silence for a long time, both of us too shaken to speak. It wasn't until we passed a sign welcoming us to the next county that Sarah finally spoke. What was that place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I don't know, and I don't ever want to find out." We made it to her sister's wedding, arriving just as the rehearsal dinner was wrapping up. We made excuses about car trouble, leaving out the details of our experience in Millbrook. Who would believe us anyway? But in the weeks and months that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of those smiles. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of their two cheerful voices ringing in my ears. Sarah and I would avoid talking about it, but I could see in her eyes that she was haunted by it too. We never took back roads again, sticking to main highways no matter how bad the traffic. And whenever we passed a small town, I'd feel my heart rate pick up, half expecting to see those wide, unnatural smiles greeting us. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself wondering about Millbrook. Is it still there, waiting for unsuspecting travelers? Are there others trapped behind those smiling faces, silently screaming for help? Or was it all some kind of shared hallucination, brought on by heat and stress? But then I'll catch a glimpse of someone smiling just a bit too widely, or hear a laugh that sounds just a little too cheerful, and I'll feel that same panic rising in my chest. And I'll know, deep in my bones, that what we experienced was real. That somewhere out there, in the hidden corners of the country, Millbrook is waiting with open arms and wide, unchanging smiles, ready to welcome its next new residents. And I'll drive a little faster, eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead, trying to outrun the memory of a town where everyone smiles, but no one is happy. The first time I caught him staring, I brushed it off as coincidence. The second time, I told myself he was just being neighborly. But by the third time, when I found my favorite mug in the wrong cabinet, I knew something was terribly wrong with the man who had moved in next door. It all started on a crisp autumn morning. the kind where the air smells of fallen leaves and possibility. I was lugging groceries up to my third-floor apartment when I first saw him. He was standing in the doorway of the unit across the hall, watching me struggle with my bags. I offered a polite smile, which he returned after a beat too long. "Just moved in?" I asked, fumbling for my keys. He nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. "Yesterday, I'm Michael." "Nice to meet you, Michael." "I'm Emma," I replied, finally managing to unlock my door. "Welcome to the building." He just stood there, staring, until I closed the door behind me. I chalked it up to social awkwardness and thought nothing more of it. Over the next few weeks, I kept running into Michael. He always seemed to be in the hallway when I left for work or came home. At first, I tried to be friendly, making small talk about the weather or complaining about the temperamental elevator, but his responses were always short, his gaze intense and unwavering. Then I started noticing him outside the building. I'd catch glimpses of him across the street when I went for my morning run. He'd be at the coffee shop where I worked on my laptop on weekends. Once, I even spotted him at the grocery store, lurking at the end of the aisle as I picked out cereal. I told myself I was being paranoid. New York was a big city, but neighborhoods could feel small. It was probably just coincidence that we kept crossing paths. Besides, Michael had never done anything threatening. He was just there. Always there. But then things in my apartment started to change. Little things at first. A book out of place on the shelf. A window I could have sworn I'd closed left open an inch. I blamed it on absent-mindedness, on the stress of my job and the late nights I'd been pulling to finish a big project. The mug was what finally convinced me something was wrong. It was my favorite, a handmade pottery piece my sister had given me for my birthday. I always kept it in the cabinet right above the coffee maker, but one morning I opened that cabinet and it wasn't there. I found it 2 cabinets over, nestled between plates I rarely used. My hands shook as I made my coffee that morning. There was no way I had put it there. No way I could have been that distracted, which meant someone else had been in my apartment, and I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. I started taking precautions. I changed the locks, installed a security camera in my living room, and asked the building manager to check if anyone had requested access to my apartment. She assured me no one had, but the uneasy feeling in my stomach didn't go away. The camera footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, but items kept moving around my apartment. My throw pillows would be arranged differently when I came home. The books on my nightstand would be in a new order. Once, I even found a shirt I'd never seen before mixed in with my laundry. I became a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I started staying late at work, dreading the moment I'd have to return home. My friends noticed the change in me, but how could I explain? I had no proof, just a growing certainty that my neighbor was somehow getting into my apartment and moving things around, watching me sleep. The possibilities were terrifying. One night, about 2 months after Michael had moved in, I woke up to a noise in my living room. My heart leapt into my throat as I lay there, ears straining in the darkness. There it was again, a soft shuffling sound like someone trying to move quietly across my hardwood floors. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call 911-1, but as my fingers touched the screen, a shadow fell my bedroom doorway. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. To Emma. Michael's voice was soft, almost gentle. "I know you're awake." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was just a nightmare. But when I opened them again, he was still there, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the living room. "How did you get in here?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. He chuckled, a low sound that sent chills down my spine. "I've always been here, Emma. You just didn't notice me before." He took a step into the room, and I scrambled back against my headboard. "Stay away from me," I yelled, finally finding my voice. "I'm calling the police." "No, you're not," he said calmly, and to my horror, I saw my phone in his hand. "I didn't want it to be like this, Emma. I wanted you to invite me in willingly, but you're making things so difficult." My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. The window was too high to jump, and he was blocking the only door. I was trapped. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I looked for something, anything I could use as a weapon. Michael took another step closer, and in the dim light, I could see his face. His eyes were wide, feverish, his smile too wide and full of teeth. "I want us to be together, Emma. I've watched you for so long. I know everything about you. Your hopes, your fears, your dreams. We're perfect for each other. Can't you see that?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "You don't know me. You're sick, Michael. You need help." His face darkened, the smile twisting into something ugly. "I'm not sick," he snarled. "I love you." "Why can't you understand that?" He lunged forward, hands outstretched. I screamed and rolled off the bed, narrowly avoiding his grasp. I ran for the door, but he was faster, grabbing my arm and yanking me back. We struggled, crashing into my dresser. I felt something sharp against my hand and grabbed it without thinking, a pair of scissors I'd left out. I swung blindly, feeling the blade connect with something soft. Michael let out a howl of pain and stumbled back. I didn't wait to see how badly I'd hurt him. I ran out of the bedroom, through the living room and into the hallway. I pounded on doors, screaming for help. Lights came on. Doors opened. My neighbors emerged, confused and alarmed. Someone was calling the police. I collapsed in the hallway, shaking and sobbing. The police arrived quickly. They found Michael in my apartment, bleeding from a cut on his arm. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept calling my name, telling me he loved me, that we were meant to be together. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and victim support services. I learned that Michael had been stalking women for years, moving from city to city when things got too hot. He'd chosen me as his latest obsession, but I was the first to fight back. I couldn't stay in that apartment after what happened. I moved, changed jobs, even changed my name, but the fear lingered. For months, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I could hear footsteps in my living room. I'd check and double-check my locks, jump at unexpected noises and flinch when strangers got too close. It's been 2 years now. I'm doing better thanks to therapy and a support group for survivors of stalking, but I'll never forget the terror of that night, the feeling of violation knowing someone had been in my space, watching me when I thought I was alone. Sometimes, when I'm walking down the street or sitting in a cafe, I'll catch someone looking at me. It's probably innocent, just a curious glance or a friendly smile, but for a moment, I'm back in that apartment, with Michael's eyes boring into me, and I'll hurry home, lock my doors, and remind myself that I'm safe now, that he can't hurt me anymore. But late at night, in the quiet darkness of my new apartment, I still wonder, how long had he really been watching me? How much did he see? And most chillingly of all, is there someone else out there, watching me even now, waiting for their chance to make me their obsession? The moment the lights flickered and died, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift. In the sudden darkness, surrounded by the hum of servers and the eerie glow of emergency lights, I realized I was no longer alone in the data center. Someone was here who shouldn't be, and they were after something far more valuable than hardware. I'd been working the night shift at Centex Data Solutions for about 6 months. It was a cushy gig, most nights, monitor the systems, run some routine maintenance, and occasionally restart a server that decided to throw a tantrum. The pay was good, the hours suited my night owl tendencies, and the solitude gave me time to work on my side projects. That night started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m. Nodded to the day shift guy as he practically ran out the door and settled in for my 12-hour stint. The first few hours were uneventful. I ran some diagnostics, answered a couple of emails from the overseas team, and was just about to dig into my midnight snack when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. For a moment, there was total darkness. Then the red glow of emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in an ominous crimson hue. My first thought was power failure, but that didn't make sense. We had multiple redundancies in place, including a generator that could power the entire building for days. This kind of total blackout shouldn't be possible. I reached for the phone to call my supervisor, but the line was dead. My cell phone showed no signal. It was as if we'd been completely cut off from the outside world. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from somewhere in the server room. My heart rate spiked. I was supposed to be the only one here. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response, but I could have sworn I heard the shuffle of feet. I grabbed a flashlight from my desk and slowly made my way into the maze of server racks. The beam of light cut through the red-tinged darkness, illuminating rows upon rows of blinking lights and humming machines. "This is a secure facility," I said, louder this time. "If someone's in here, you need to identify yourself immediately." Again, no response. But as I rounded a corner, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone ducking behind a server rack. My palms were sweaty now, the flashlight slippery in my grip. I should leave, I thought. Call the police. But with the phones down, I had no way to contact anyone. And if these intruders were after what I thought they were, I couldn't just walk away. I crept forward, every sense on high alert. The constant hum of the servers, usually background noise to me, now seemed deafening. I strained to hear any sound that might give away the intruders' positions. As I neared the back of the room, where our most sensitive servers were kept, I heard voices, low, urgent whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against a server rack, inching closer, faster. One voice hissed, "We don't have much time." "I'm working as fast as I can," another replied. "This encryption is state of the art. It's not like cracking your grandma's Facebook password." I peered around the corner and my blood ran cold. Two figures hunched over a laptop, which was connected directly to one of our most secure servers. They were dressed all in black, faces obscured by ski masks. This was bad, really bad. That server contained some of our clients' most sensitive data, trade secrets, financial records, personal information The kind of stuff that could ruin lives and topple companies if it fell into the wrong hands. I had to do something. But what? I was no action hero. My combat skills were limited to button mashing in video games, but I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from my hiding place. "Step away from the server," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You're trespassing in a secure facility." The two figures whirled around. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, frozen in shock. Then one of them laughed. Well. Looks like we missed one. What are you gonna do, tech boy? Call the cops?" I swallowed hard. The silent alarm has already been triggered. Police are on their way. It was a bluff, but I hope they couldn't know that for sure. The two shared a look. "He's lying," the one by the laptop said. "If the alarm had been triggered, we'd know." Our guy on the inside made sure of that. My heart sank. They had someone on the inside. That explained how they'd gotten past our security. "Doesn't matter," the first one said. "We're almost done here anyway." He turned to me, and I saw the glint of a gun in his hand. "As for you, I'm afraid we can't have any witnesses." Time seemed to slow down. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. In that moment, pure instinct took over. I dove to the side, crashing into a server rack. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Alarms started blaring. Apparently, gunshots were enough to trigger the system that the hackers thought they disabled. Red lights began flashing, adding to the chaos. I scrambled to my feet and ran, darting between the rows of servers. I could hear them behind me, shouting and knocking things over in their pursuit. I needed a plan. I couldn't outrun them forever, and eventually they'd corner me. Then I remembered. The fire suppression system. It was my last resort, a desperate move that would likely fry millions of dollars worth of equipment. But right now, it was my only chance. I made a sharp turn, heading for the control panel. Bullets pinged off metal around me, spurring me to run faster than I'd ever run before. I reached the panel and slammed my hand down on the emergency release. Immediately, a klaxon began to sound, even louder than the alarms already blaring. "Warning, fire suppression system activated. You have 30 seconds to evacuate," an automated voice announced. "No." I heard one of the hackers yell, "We're not done." But it was too late. With a great hiss, the room began to fill with halon gas. The hackers' curses turned to coughs, then to gasps for air. I held my breath and ran for the exit, praying I could make it before the gas overwhelmed me. My lungs were burning, spots dancing in front of my eyes, when I finally burst through the door into the hallway, gulping in great lungfuls of clean air. Behind me, I could hear the hackers stumbling out as well, but they were clearly disoriented. By the time they recovered, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, paramedic checkups, and frantic calls from upper management. The damage to the data center was extensive, but our client's data was safe. The hackers were arrested, and their inside man was soon identified and apprehended as well. As I finally drove home, the sun peeking over the horizon, I was exhausted, but oddly exhilarated. I'd faced real danger and come out on top. I'd protected the data I was responsible for, even at great cost, but as the adrenaline faded, a sobering thought occurred to me. This attack was sophisticated, well planned, It wouldn't be the last. In our increasingly digital world, data was the new gold, and there would always be those willing to go to extreme lengths to get it. I realized then that my job wasn't just about maintaining servers and running updates. I was on the front lines of a new kind of war, one fought with keyboards and code rather than guns and bombs, and I was determined to be ready for the next battle. As I crawled into bed, my mind was already churning with ideas for improving our security, but for now, sleep beckoned. After all, I had another night shift tomorrow, and in this line of work, you never knew what challenges each night might bring. The first growl echoed through the cave, freezing us all in place. The second made our blood run cold. By the third, we knew with terrifying certainty that we weren't alone in this dark underground maze, and whatever was in here with us, it was hungry. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a chance for me and my 3 closest friends to escape the city and enjoy some fresh air. Jake, our self-proclaimed wilderness expert, had heard about a little-known trail that led to some spectacular views. Sarah, always up for an adventure, jumped at the idea. Mike and I were more hesitant, but we eventually gave in to their enthusiasm. The hike started off great. The weather was perfect, cool and crisp with a light breeze. We laughed, shared stories, and marveled at the beauty of nature around us. But as the hours wore on, the trail became less defined. Jake assured us we were going the right way, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. By late afternoon, we had to admit it. We were lost. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. That's when Sarah spotted the cave entrance, half hidden behind a cluster of boulders. "We should stay there for the night," she suggested. "It'll shelter us from the wind, and we can figure out our way back in the morning." None of us liked the idea much, but with darkness approaching and no better options, we reluctantly agreed. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing us to go in single file. I went last, casting one final glance at the fading daylight before ducking into the darkness. The interior of the cave opened up into a larger chamber. Our flashlights cast eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing ominously. "Well, this is cozy," Mike said, his attempted humor falling flat in the oppressive atmosphere. We set up our makeshift camp, spreading out sleeping bags and dividing up the meager rations we had left. No one felt much like talking. The weight of our situation, lost in a cave with limited supplies, was starting to... I was just about to suggest we try to get some sleep when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very walls of the cave. We all froze, eyes wide in the dim light of our flashlights. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. Then we heard it again, louder this time, and closer. "That's not the wind," Mike said, scrambling to his feet. "We need to get out of here." But as we turned towards the entrance, another growl came from that direction. Whatever it was between us and our only way out. "There's got to be another way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Caves like this often have multiple chambers. Maybe we can find another exit. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. We quickly packed up our things, hands shaking as we stuffed sleeping bags into backpacks. The growls were getting more frequent now, interspersed with the sound of something large moving in the darkness. We moved deeper into the cave, our flashlights providing meager illumination in the pitch black. The passage narrowed, then widened again into another chamber, but this one wasn't empty. Our lights fell on a pile of bones in the corner. Some were clearly animal, but others looked disturbingly human. Sarah let out a choked sob. Oh God, what is this place? As if in answer, a roar shook the cave, so loud it made my ears ring, and then we saw it. It emerged from a shadowy crevice, a creature that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a nightmarish blend of bear and something almost human. Its eyes reflected our flashlight beams, glowing an eerie yellow. Saliva dripped from jaws filled with teeth as long as my fingers. For a moment, we all stood frozen in terror. Then Jake shouted, "Run!" and we all snapped into action. We bolted down a side passage, the creature's roars and the sound of its massive body scraping against stone close behind. We ran blindly, taking turns at random, driven by pure terror. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness. But eventually, we found ourselves in a small chamber with no other exits. We were trapped. The creature's growls grew closer. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, flashlights pointed at the entrance. I could feel Sarah trembling beside me, hear Mike's rapid, panicked breathing. "What do we do?" Sarah whimpered. I looked around desperately, searching for anything that might help us. That's when I noticed the strange markings on the wall behind us. They looked ancient, like cave paintings. But there was something off about them. They seemed to shimmer faintly in the light of our flashlights. On impulse, I reached out and touched one. To my shock, my hand passed right through the stone. "Guys," I gasped, "I think I found something." But before I could explain, the creature appeared at the entrance to our chamber. It filled the entire opening, its yellow eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity. "Go!" I shouted, pushing Sarah towards the wall, through the markings. I don't think they understood, but survival instinct took over. One by one, they pressed against the wall and vanished. I could hear the creature's enraged roar as it realized its prey was escaping. Just as I felt its hot breath on my neck, I threw myself at the wall. There was a moment of vertigo, a sensation of falling, and then I was tumbling onto soft grass under an open sky. I looked up to see Sarah, Mike, and Jake staring at me with wide eyes. Behind us was a sheer rock face, no sign of a cave entrance, just those same strange, shimmering markings. We were safe, somehow transported out of the cave and back to the surface. But as the adrenaline faded and relief set in, new questions arose. What was that creature? How had we traveled through solid rock? And most troublingly, how many other hikers had stumbled into that cave, never to return? We made our way back to civilization in a daze. Our story met with disbelief by the park rangers. They searched the area we described, but found no cave, no monster. Just those strange markings, which they dismissed as ordinary rock formations. In the months that followed, we tried to move on with our lives, but the memory of that night in the cave haunted us. We'd seen something that defied explanation, experienced something that challenged everything we thought we knew about reality. I found myself researching cryptozoology, cave systems, even quantum physics, searching for any explanation for what we'd encountered. Sarah threw herself into her work, while Mike turned to religion, finding comfort in faith. Jake, ironically, swore off the outdoors entirely. We don't talk about that night much anymore. It's too unbelievable, too terrifying to put into words. But sometimes, When I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can hear a distant growl, and I wonder about that creature, still lurking in its underground lair, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. And I think about those markings, that impossible portal that saved our lives. What were they? Who put them there? Are there others, scattered around the world, waiting to be discovered? I don't have answers, but I know one thing for certain. The next time someone suggests a hike to see some spectacular views, I'm staying home. Some adventures, it turns out, are better left unexplored. The first crack of the window pane sent my heart racing. The second made me realize this wasn't just the wind. By the third, I knew with sickening certainty that someone was trying to break in, and I was alone in a house miles from help. I never should have agreed to house sit for my aunt. Sure, her place was beautiful, a sprawling country home nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont, but it was also isolated, the nearest neighbor a good mile down the winding dirt road. When she'd asked me to stay for a week while she was on vacation, I jumped at the chance for a quiet getaway. Now, as I heard the sound of shattering glass downstairs, I was regretting my decision with every fiber of my being. The day had started normally enough. I'd woken up late, enjoying the luxury of sleeping in without an alarm. I'd made myself a leisurely breakfast, then settled on the porch with a book, basking in the warm summer sun. As evening approached, I'd come inside and made dinner, then curled up on the couch to watch a movie. That's when I'd heard it, a soft thud from outside. I'd paused the movie, listening intently. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then another thud, followed by the sound of footsteps on the porch. My first thought was that my aunt had come home early, but as I approached the front door, I saw a shadow move past the window, a figure much larger than my petite aunt. That's when the first crack of glass sent me scrambling back. Now, huddled in the upstairs guest room, I could hear them moving around downstairs. The heavy tread of boots on hardwood, the crash of something being knocked over. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, trying to dial 911. But as the call tried to connect, I remembered my aunt's words from when I'd arrived. "Cell service is spotty out here. If you need to make a call, use the landline in the kitchen." The kitchen, where the intruders were now. I bit back a sob of frustration and fear. "Think," I told myself, "there has to be a way out of this." I looked around the room, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I unplugged it, gripping it tightly as I crept towards the door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from downstairs. I could hear them talking now, their voices low and gruff. "Check upstairs," one of them said. "Make sure we're alone." My heart leapt into my throat. I looked around frantically, spotting a linen closet at the end of the hall. Without thinking, I darted towards it, slipping inside just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Through a crack in the door, I watched as a man passed by. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed all in black. In his hand, he held a crowbar. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't check the closet. He moved from room to room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. I could hear him rifling through drawers, opening closets. He was getting closer. Just as I thought he was about to discover my hiding place, a shout came from downstairs. "Hey, I found something." The man turned and hurried back down the stairs. I let out a shaky breath, my legs trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall for support. I knew I couldn't stay in the closet forever. Sooner or later they'd find me. I had to get out of the house. Clutching the lamp, I eased the closet door open. The hallway was empty. I crept towards the stairs, straining my ears for any sound of movement below. I could hear them in what sounded like my aunt's study. They were arguing about something, their voices rising in frustration. This was my chance. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wood. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they must be able to hear it. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and paused, listening. They were still in the study. The front door was just a few feet away. If I could make it there, I took a step forward, then another. The door was so close. Just a few more steps. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked loudly under my foot. The voices in the study stopped abruptly. "What was that?" one of them asked. Panic surged through me. I abandoned all attempts at stealth and ran for the door, yanking it open and bursting out into the cool night air. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the pounding of feet. I ran down the porch steps and across the lawn, heading for the woods that bordered the property. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged into the trees, but I didn't slow down. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, their angry shouts echoing in the darkness. I ran blindly with no idea where I was going, driven only by the need to get away. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I pushed on. The sound of pursuit seemed to be getting fainter. Or was that just my imagination? Just as I thought I might have lost them, my foot caught on a root. I went down hard, the lamp flying from my hand. For a moment I lay there, dazed and winded. Then I heard it. Voices. Closer now. They were coming. I struggled to my feet, looking around desperately for somewhere to hide. That's when I saw it, a large hollow log a few feet away. Without hesitation, I dove into it, curling up as small as I could make myself. From my hiding place, I watched as flashlight beams swept across the forest floor. I could see their feet moving past, hear their angry muttering. Where'd she go? She can't have gotten far. Keep looking. I held my breath, pressing myself further into the log. Please, I thought, please don't let them find me. Minutes passed like hours. I could hear them moving around, searching. More than once, a beam of light passed over my hiding place, and I was sure I'd been discovered, but each time they moved on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard one of them say, "Forget it. She's long gone. Let's get out of here before someone shows up." Their footsteps receded, and soon the forest was quiet once more, but I didn't move. I was too scared, too unsure if it was really over. I don't know how long I stayed in that log. Hours, probably. The sky was starting to lighten when I finally gathered the courage to crawl out. My whole body ached, and I was covered in dirt and scratches. But I was alive. Somehow, I'd survived. I made my way back to the house cautiously, half expecting the intruders to jump out at any moment. But the place was quiet. The front door stood open, and inside I could see evidence of their search. Drawers pulled out, items strewn across the floor. With shaking hands, I picked up the landline and called the police. They arrived quickly, lights flashing and sirens blaring. I gave my statement in a daze, still not quite believing what had happened. The intruders were never caught. The police said they were probably just burglars, opportunists, who'd thought the house was empty. But in my nightmares, I still see them chasing me through those dark woods, their angry shouts echoing in my ears. I didn't stay at my aunt's house after that. I couldn't. The place that had seemed so peaceful now felt tainted, unsafe. I went back to my small apartment in the city, finding comfort in the constant noise and presence of other people. But sometimes, late at night, when the city grows quiet and the shadows seem to lengthen, I find myself thinking about that night, about how close I came to. I don't even know what. And I wonder about those men. Who were they, really? What were they looking for? I'll probably never know the answers, but one thing's for certain. I'll never house sit in a remote location again. Some peace and quiet just isn't worth the risk. The moment I saw his thumb jutting out from the side of the desolate highway, I knew I shouldn't stop. But as the lone figure grew larger in my rearview mirror, curiosity overrode my better judgment. Little did I know, this decision would plunge me into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the landscape broken only by the occasional tumbleweed or distant mountain range. My eyes were heavy, my back aching from too many hours behind the wheel. I was looking forward to reaching the next town, wherever that might be, and calling it a night. That's when I saw him, a solitary figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched, thumb raised in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. As I got closer, I could make out more details. He was a man, probably in his mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and clothes that had seen better days. A large backpack sat at his feet. Every instinct told me to keep driving. I'd heard all the stories about the dangers of picking up strangers, especially in the middle of nowhere, but something about the man's posture, the slump of his shoulders, made me hesitate. He looked defeated, desperate. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was slowing down, pulling onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of him. I watched in my side mirror as he jogged towards the car, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank you," he said as he opened the passenger door. I didn't think anyone was going to stop. I nodded, trying to quell the unease in my stomach. "Where are you headed?" "Just as far as you're willing to take me," he replied, settling into the seat. "I'm Jim, by the way." "Alex," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Nice to meet you, Jim." For the first hour or so, everything seemed fine. Jim was quiet but polite, answering my occasional questions with brief responses. He was from back east, he said, trying to make his way to California for a fresh start. I found myself relaxing, thinking maybe I'd been paranoid earlier. As night fell and the desert grew dark around us, Jim began to get more talkative. He asked about me, where I was from, where I was going. I gave him vague answers, still not entirely comfortable with sharing too much personal information. "You ever wonder what it would be like to just disappear?" Jim asked suddenly, his voice taking on a strange edge. "To leave everything behind and become someone else entirely?" I glanced at him, a chill running down my spine despite the warm night air. "Can't say I have," I replied cautiously. Jim chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I have, a lot." Lately, the conversation lulled after that, an uncomfortable silence filling the car. I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, my eyes flicking more frequently to the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty, stretching into darkness. Mind if I change the radio station? Jim asked after a while. Go ahead, I said, grateful for the break in tension. As he leaned forward to fiddle with the dial, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Tucked into the waistband of his jeans, partially hidden by his shirt, was the unmistakable shape of a gun. My mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? Was he a criminal on the run? Was he planning to rob me, or worse? I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. So, Jim, where exactly in California are you headed? He turned to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. I thought I said I didn't have a specific destination. Right. Sorry, I mumbled, cursing myself for the slip-up. I must have misheard. Jim was watching me now, his earlier friendliness replaced by something harder, more calculating. I could feel sweat beating on my forehead, my heart pounding in my chest. You seem nervous, Alex, he said, his voice low. Everything okay? I nodded, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. Yeah, fine. Just tired, I guess. Been driving a long time. Maybe we should pull over, Jim suggested. Take a break. No, I said quickly, then tried to recover. I mean, I'm okay. There's a town coming up soon, I think. We can stop there. Jim didn't respond, but I could feel his eyes on me. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional static from the radio. I was trying to figure out what to do when I saw it, a sign for a rest stop just a mile ahead. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Maybe I could find a way to get help, or at least get away from Jim. I'm going to pull into this rest stop, I announced, trying to sound casual. Need to use the restroom? Jim nodded slowly. All right. I pulled into the rest stop, my mind whirling with half-formed plans. There were a few other cars parked there, which gave me a small measure of comfort. As soon as I stopped the car, I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle. Alex, Jim said, his voice stopping me cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I turned to find the gun in his hand, pointed directly at me. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Jim, I said, my voice shaking, you don't have to do this, whatever you're running from. Shut up, he snapped. Start the car, we're leaving. Please, I begged. Just take the car, you don't need me. His laugh was cold, humorless. Oh, but I do. See, you're my insurance policy. As long as I have you, no one's going to look too closely at me. We're just two friends on a road trip, right? With trembling hands, I started the car. As we pulled out of the rest stop, I saw a family returning to their minivan. I wanted to scream, to honk the horn, to do something to get their attention, but the cold press of the gun against my ribs kept me silent. We drove through the night, Jim directing me onto smaller and smaller roads. I lost track of where we were, each mile taking us further from safety, further from any hope of rescue. As dawn began to break, Jim instructed me to pull onto a dirt road that led into the desert. We bumped along for what felt like hours, until finally, he told me to stop. End of the line, Alex, he said, gesturing for me to get out of the car. On shaky legs, I stepped out into the desert. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Jim walked me a short distance from the car, the gun never wavering. I'm sorry it had to be this way, he said, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. You seem like a good guy. Wrong place, wrong time, I guess. I closed my eyes, waiting for the shot that would end it all, but it never came. Instead, I heard the sound of retreating footsteps, then a car door slamming. I opened my eyes just in time to see my car disappearing in a cloud of dust. Jim was gone, leaving me stranded in the middle of the desert with nothing but the clothes on my back. It took 2 days for someone to find me. 2 days of scorching heat and freezing nights, of thirst and hunger, and the very real fear that I would die out there. When a park ranger finally spotted me, I was delirious, sunburned, and on the verge of collapse. The police never found Jim or my car. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that many victims of similar crimes weren't so fortunate. But as I lay in the hospital, trying to make sense of what had happened, I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, betrayed by my own compassion. It's been years since that night, but I still see Jim's face in my dreams. I still feel the press of that gun against my ribs. And every time I see a hitchhiker on the side of the road, I feel a mixture of fear and guilt as I speed past, windows locked, eyes straight ahead. I learned a hard lesson in the desert that day. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that look just like us, the ones that prey on our kindness, our empathy. And sometimes the choice to help a stranger can lead us down a road from which there's no turning back. The first night in our new house, I heard footsteps when everyone else was asleep. The second night, I found a door that hadn't been there before. By the third night, I knew with chilling certainty that we weren't alone in this place, and whatever was sharing our home didn't want us here. We'd been so excited about the move. After years of cramped apartment living, Sarah and I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a house. It was an old Victorian, a bit rundown, but with good bones, as the realtor kept emphasizing. The price was surprisingly low for the neighborhood, but we didn't question our luck. We were too thrilled at the prospect of space for our growing family. Sarah was 5 months pregnant with our first child. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. The house creaked and groaned, but we chalked it up to its age. "It's just settling," I'd tell Sarah when she mentioned hearing odd noises at night. I was so focused on getting everything ready for the baby that I barely noticed the strange cold spots in certain rooms, or the way shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision. It was on the third night that things took a turn. I was up late, painting the nursery, when I heard it. Clear, distinct footsteps coming from the floor above. But that was impossible. We didn't have an attic, and Sarah was sound asleep in our second-floor bedroom, heart pounding. I crept up the stairs, paint roller still in hand. The sound had stopped, but as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the wall across from our bedroom, was a door that I was certain hadn't been there that morning. I stood frozen, staring at it. It was old, the wood dark with age, with an ornate brass knob that seemed to gleam in the dim light. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back downstairs and pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity, that damned human trait, propelled me forward. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath and turned it slowly. The door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the silent house. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable. The beam of my phone's flashlight barely seemed to make a dent in it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just that oppressive silence. I took a tentative step forward. then another. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The air felt thick, heavy with a musty smell of long disused spaces. Suddenly, my light fell on something that made my heart leap into my throat. A figure, standing motionless in the darkness. I stumbled back, a cry of terror caught in my throat, but it wasn't a person. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a mannequin, dressed in what looked like clothes from another century. Around it were piles of boxes and old furniture, all covered in a thick layer of dust. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. It was just an old storage space, probably sealed up years ago and forgotten. Nothing sinister, nothing supernatural, just an oddity in an old house. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye. A glint of metal nestled among the boxes. Curiosity got the better of me once again, and I moved closer to investigate. It was a locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was an inscription on the back, but it was too worn to make out. As I fumbled with the clasp, trying to open it, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps coming from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But there was nothing there, just the open doorway, leading back to the familiar hallway of our home. That should have been my cue to leave, to slam that door shut and never look back. But I didn't. Instead, I pocketed the locket and continued exploring. The room was larger than I'd initially thought, stretching back into shadows my light couldn't penetrate. I moved deeper, past more mannequins and piles of antique furniture. The further I went, the colder it got, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Get out!" I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Get out!" The whisper had become a roar, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I ran like I'd never run before, back through the maze of forgotten things, towards the door. But it wasn't there. Where the door had been was gone. There was now just more wall, more darkness. Panic seized me. I pounded on the walls, screaming for help, but my cries seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. Just as despair was about to overwhelm me, my hand brushed against something, the doorknob. With a sob of relief, I turned it and burst through, slamming the door behind me. I stood there in the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart racing. Had that really happened? Or had I fallen asleep while painting and had some kind of vivid nightmare? But the weight of the locket in my pocket told me it had been real, all too real. I stumbled back to the bedroom, my mind reeling. Should I wake Sarah? Tell her what had happened? But how could I explain something I barely understood myself? In the end, exhaustion won out. I crawled into bed, telling myself I'd figure it out in the morning. But when morning came, the door was gone. The wall was smooth, unbroken, as if the events of the night had been nothing but a dream. Even the locket had vanished from my pocket. I tried to convince myself that's all it had been, a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and paint fumes. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was in our house. Something that didn't want us here. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became our new normal. Items would move on their own. Doors would slam shut without warning. And always, there were the footsteps at night. Sarah noticed too. I'd catch her staring at the walls sometimes, a look of confusion and fear on her face. But we didn't talk about it. It was as if speaking about the strange events would make them more real, more dangerous. Then came the night I woke to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Panic gripped me as I searched the house, calling her name. I was about to call the police when I heard it. Her voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from behind that damned door that had reappeared in the hallway. I didn't hesitate this time. I flung the door open and plunged into the darkness beyond. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. John, help me!" Her voice sounded distant, frightened. I ran towards the sound, barely aware of my surroundings. Objects loomed out of the darkness, more mannequins, old furniture, things I couldn't even identify. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was finding Sarah. I found her in what looked like an old nursery, surrounded by creepy antique dolls and a rusted crib. She was curled up in a rocking chair, her hands protectively over her swollen belly. "Sarah," I breathed, relief washing over me. "What happened? How did you get here?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know. I woke up and I was just here." "John, what is this place? What's happening to us?" Before I could answer, a cold wind swept through the room. The dolls' heads turned, their glassy eyes fixing on us. And then we heard it. That voice again, no longer a whisper but a bone-chilling shriek. "This is our home." We ran, hand in hand. We fled through the twisting, impossible space of that hidden room. Behind us we could hear things moving, pursuing. The air was filled with whispers and screams, the sound of 100 years of trapped souls. Somehow, we made it back to the door. We burst through it, and I slammed it shut, leaning against it as if my weight alone could keep the horrors at bay. We didn't stay another night in that house. We packed what we could and left, abandoning most of our possessions and any hope of recovering our down payment. Some things are more important than money. We later learned the history of the house. The tragic deaths, the disappearances, the string of owners who fled in the night. We were lucky, the local historian told us, lucky to have escaped. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps, still feel the cold touch of that locket in my pocket. And I wonder about the souls trapped in that hidden room, and I pray that they stay there, locked away in that house where reality bends and nightmares come to life, because I know the truth now. Some houses are never truly empty, and some doors, once opened, can never really be closed again. The moment I stepped onto the porch of that isolated farmhouse, I knew something was terribly wrong. The door hung askew on its hinges, and an eerie silence blanketed the property. As a social worker, I'd seen my share of troubled homes, but nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that awaited inside. My name is Claire, and I've been a social worker for nearly a decade. I thought I'd seen it all. Homes ravaged by poverty, families torn apart by addiction, children bearing scars both visible and hidden. But the Lawson case? That was different. That was the case that almost broke me. It started like any other day. I'd received a report about the Lawson family, concerns about neglect, possible domestic violence. Standard procedure was to do a home visit, assess the situation, and determine if further intervention was necessary. The file noted that the family lived in a remote area, but I hadn't realized just how isolated until I found myself driving down a narrow dirt road, fields of dying corn stretching endlessly on either side. The farmhouse appeared suddenly, looming against the grey sky like something out of a Gothic novel. Paint peeled from its weathered boards, and several windows were boarded up. As I parked my car, I noticed there were no other vehicles in sight. Strange, considering the file mentioned 2 parents and 3 children. I gathered my bag and clipboard, took a deep breath, and approached the front door. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was amiss. The door wasn't just unlocked, it was partially open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Smears of what looked disturbingly like blood stained the white paint. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the oppressive silence. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, this is Claire from Social Services. I'm here for our scheduled visit." No response, not even the sound of movement from within the house. Just that unnerving silence. Every instinct told me to turn back, to call the police and let them handle whatever was going on here. But I couldn't shake the thought of those 3 children mentioned in the file. What if they were in there, hurt or scared? I had a duty to make sure they were safe. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior was dark, the air thick with the musty smell of neglect and something else, something coppery and sickening that made my stomach turn. "Hello?" I called again, fumbling for the light switch. It clicked, but nothing happened. The power was out. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. What I saw made my blood run cold. The living room was a scene of chaos. Furniture overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor, and there, on the faded floral wallpaper, were more of those dark, rust-colored smears. My heart pounding, I moved deeper into the house. The kitchen was equally disturbed. Drawers pulled out and their contents scattered across the linoleum. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, covered in a fine layer of mold. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been recent. As I turned to check the rest of the house, something caught my eye. A child's drawing was pinned to the refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a smiling sun. The crayon sketch showed a house, this house, with 5 stick figures standing in front. But 3 of the figures had been violently scribbled out with black crayon, leaving only 2 standing. A chill ran down my spine. What had happened to this family? I made my way upstairs, each step creaking ominously under my weight. The upper floor was a long hallway with several doors leading off it. The first room I checked appeared to be the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, clothes strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry, but it was the message scrawled on the mirror in what looked horribly like lipstick that made my breath catch. "They're coming for us." The next room was clearly a child's, pink wallpaper, stuffed animals piled on the bed, but here too, signs of violence marred the innocent space. Deep gouges scored the walls, and a family photo on the nightstand had been smashed, glass shards glittering in the beam of my flashlight. As I backed out of the room, a sound from downstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't alone in the house. I tried to calm my breathing, to think rationally. It could be one of the Lawsons returned home to find a stranger in their house. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Whatever was down there, it wasn't the family I'd come to check on. I crept towards the stairs, straining my ears for any further sound. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A low, guttural sound. almost like an animal growling. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down into the darkness below. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a shape moved in the shadows at the bottom of the staircase. A figure, hunched and misshapen, its movements jerky and unnatural. Terror seized me. This was no person, no animal I'd ever seen. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure. But suddenly, the thing's head snapped up, and I found myself staring into eyes that glowed an unnatural, sickly yellow in the darkness. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before. Down the hallway, towards what I prayed was another staircase, another way out. Behind me I could hear it coming, its movements faster now, accompanied by a high-pitched keening that made my skin crawl. I found the back stairs and practically flew down them, my feet barely touching the steps. I burst out the back door into the fading daylight, not daring to look back as I sprinted towards my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror, something emerging from the house, its form seeming to shift and change as it moved. I peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind me as I accelerated down the dirt road. I didn't slow down until I hit the main highway, my heart still pounding in my chest. When I finally felt safe enough to pull over, I called the police with trembling hands. I told them about the signs of struggle, the disturbing messages, the feeling that something terrible had happened in that house. But I couldn't bring myself to mention what I'd seen inside. Who would believe me? The police investigation turned up nothing, no bodies, no evidence of foul play. The Lawson family had simply vanished, leaving behind a house full of unanswered questions. The case went cold, filed away as just another mysterious disappearance. But I knew the truth. I knew that something inhuman had been in that house, something that had likely been responsible for whatever fate had befallen the Lawsons. And sometimes, late at night, I still see those glowing yellow eyes in my dreams, still hear that unearthly keening sound. I left social work soon after. I couldn't face the possibility of walking into another house like that, of encountering whatever nightmare had taken up residence in that isolated farmhouse. Some days, I can almost convince myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. But then, I'll catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, or hear a sound that's not quite natural, and I'll remember. I'll remember that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Things that lurk in the dark corners of isolated homes, waiting for unsuspecting visitors. And I'll say a silent prayer for the Lawson family, hoping that whatever fate befell them was quick, because the alternative, that they might still be out there somewhere, in the clutches of that unnatural thing, is too horrifying to contemplate. So I keep my doors locked, my lights on, and I never ever venture into isolated farmhouses anymore. Because once you've seen behind the veil, once you've glimpsed the horrors that lurk just out of sight, you can never truly feel safe again. The first splash of red caught my eye, a stark contrast against the dull green of the forest floor. The second made my heart race, a sinking feeling in my gut. By the third, I knew we had stumbled upon something we were never meant to see, and the distant sound of engines told me we weren't alone anymore. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend camping trip, just me and my 3 best friends, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. We'd been planning it for months, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. The spot we'd chosen was deep in the national forest, far off the beaten path. No cell signal, no worries, Mike had said with a grin as we set off down the narrow, winding trail. The hike in was grueling, but the payoff seemed worth it. We found a beautiful clearing next to a babbling stream, the perfect spot to set up camp. As we pitched our tents and gathered firewood, the stress of our daily lives seemed to melt away. That night, we sat around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, the stars twinkling brightly overhead. It was early the next morning when things took a turn. Tom and I had volunteered to fetch more water from the stream, while Mike and Sarah prepared breakfast. We were about a quarter mile from camp when I saw it, a splash of red on a fallen log. "Hey Tom," I called out, pointing. "What do you think that is?" He squinted, then shrugged. "Probably just some berries or something. Come on, let's fill these jugs and get back, I'm starving." But as we moved closer to the stream, we saw more splashes of red. Too many to be berries, too dark. My stomach churned as I realized what it probably was. "Tom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think that's blood." His eyes widened, and I saw the same fear I felt reflected in them. Maybe an animal got hurt," he suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We should have turned back then. Should have grabbed Mike and Sarah and hightailed it out of there. But curiosity, that damned human trait, got the better of us. We moved forward, following the trail of blood. The scene we stumbled upon will haunt me for the rest of my days. In a small clearing, partially hidden by dense underbrush, lay a body, or what was left of one. It was a man, or had been. His chest was a mangled mess, his face frozen in a rictus of terror, but it was the symbol carved into his forehead that made my blood run cold. A crude pentagram, still oozing blood. Tom retched beside me, and I wasn't far behind. This was no animal attack. This was something much, much worse. "We need to get out of here," I managed to gasp between dry heaves. "We need to call the police." Tom nodded frantically, his face pale. We turned to run back to camp, but froze as we heard a sound that didn't belong in these woods. The distant rumble of engines. "Oh God," Tom whispered. "What if they're coming back?" The smart thing would have been to hide, to wait until whoever it was had passed. But panic had taken hold, and all we could think about was getting back to Mike and Sarah, getting as far away from this nightmare as possible. We ran, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The sound of engines grew louder, and now we could hear voices too. Gruff, angry voices that sent chills down my spine. We burst into our campsite, startling Mike and Sarah, who were sitting by the remains of last night's fire. "Pack up," I gasped. "We need to leave, now." "What? Why? What's going on?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "No time to explain," Tom cut in, already starting to dismantle his tent. "There are people coming, bad people. We need to go." To their credit, Mike and Sarah didn't argue. They must have seen the terror in our eyes, heard the urgency in our voices. We packed in record time, leaving behind anything non-essential. Just as we were about to head out, the voices became clearer. They were close, too close. "Split up," Mike whispered. "Sarah, you go with Tom. Head east, I'll go with Alex. We'll head west. Meet back at the car if you can. If not, just keep going until you find help." We nodded, the gravity of the situation hitting us all. This wasn't a movie or a game. This was real. and our lives were in danger. Sarah and Tom disappeared into the trees, heading east. Mike and I waited a beat, then plunged into the underbrush in the opposite direction. We hadn't gone more than a few yards when we heard shouts from behind us. "Hey, there's a campsite here." "They can't be far." We ran. Branches tore at our clothes. Rocks and roots bruised our feet through our hiking boots, but we didn't slow down. The voices behind us grew fainter, but we could still hear them crashing through the woods, hunting us. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we paused, gasping for breath. The forest was quiet now, save for our ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. "Do you think we lost them?" I whispered. Mike shook his head. "I don't know, but we can't stay here. We need to keep moving." We pressed on, trying to be quieter now, constantly looking over our shoulders. The sun climbed higher in the sky, filtering through the canopy above. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now, it felt oppressive, the heat and humidity sapping our strength. We were just starting to hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd gotten away when we heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified. Sarah's scream. Mike's face went pale. "No," he breathed. "Oh God, no." We stood there, frozen in indecision. Every instinct screamed at us to run towards the sound, to help our friends. But we knew that would be suicide. Whatever had happened to Sarah and Tom, the same fate awaited us if we went back. With heavy hearts, we pushed on. The scream had come from behind us, which meant we were still heading in the right direction, if we could just reach the car. But it seemed the universe had other plans. As we crested a small hill, we found ourselves face to face with two men. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks, and they were armed. Well, one of them said. His voice muffled by the mask. "Looks like we found the stragglers." We turned to run, but more figures emerged from the trees behind us. We were surrounded. What followed was a blur of terror and pain. They marched us back to their camp, a collection of RVs and tents hidden in a large clearing. Others were there, all masked, all armed, and in the center of it all was an altar, dark with dried blood. They tied us up and threw us in one of the RVs. Through the window, I could see them preparing for some kind of ritual. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. As darkness fell, they lit torches, the flickering light making their masked faces even more terrifying. I don't know how long we were in there. Hours, maybe. We didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The horror of our situation was too overwhelming. What had happened to Sarah and Tom? Were they already dead? Were we next? Just when I thought all hope was lost, we heard it. Sirens, lots of them, getting closer. The camp erupted into chaos, people running, shouting, engines starting up. In the confusion, someone must have forgotten about us. The door to the RV burst open, and there stood a police officer, his gun drawn. "Are you okay?" he asked, quickly moving to untie us. "Can you walk?" We nodded, too shocked to speak. He led us out of the camp, past other officers who were rounding up some of the cultists. An ambulance was waiting, and paramedics swarmed around us, checking for injuries. It wasn't until much later, after hours of questioning and medical exams, that we learned the full story. A hiker had stumbled upon the cult's previous campsite, found evidence of their rituals and alerted the authorities. They'd been tracking the group for days, and our lucky encounter with their search party had led them right to the cultists' new location. Sarah and Tom were found alive, thankfully, beaten and traumatized, but alive. The body we'd found, that hadn't been their first victim. And if the police hadn't arrived when they did, it wouldn't have been their last. Years have passed since that day, but the memories still haunt me. I don't go camping anymore. Can't stand to be in the woods, because now I know that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones with claws and fangs. Sometimes they're the ones who look just like us, hiding behind masks, waiting in the shadows to prey on the unsuspecting. And in the dark of night, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my window, I still hear those engines, those angry voices. I still feel the terror of being hunted, and I wonder with a shudder what might have happened if those sirens hadn't come when they did. The moment they walked in, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift. Their eyes were too sharp, their smiles too wide, and the way they looked at me, it was like a predator sizing up its prey. Little did I know, my quiet night at the 24-hour diner was about to turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Alice, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Mel's Diner for about 6 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and suits my night owl tendencies. Most nights are pretty quiet. A few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe some college kids grabbing a late-night snack. Nothing I can't handle. That night started like any other. I'd just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, plastering on my best customer service smile, but it froze on my face when I saw them. There were 5 of them, all men, dressed in dark clothes that seemed a bit too nice for our little diner. They swaggered in like they owned the place, talking and laughing loudly. The few other customers, an elderly couple and a lone trucker, glanced up nervously before quickly looking away. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sit anywhere you like." "I'll be right with you." They chose a booth in the corner, sprawling out across the seats. As I approached with menus, I could feel their eyes on me, assessing, calculating. It made my skin crawl. "What can I get for you?" I asked, pen poised over my notepad. The one closest to me, a man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned up at me. His teeth were too white, too sharp. "Coffee, sweetheart, lots of it, and keep it coming." I nodded and turned to leave, but he caught my wrist. His grip was like iron, his skin cold against mine. "And don't go anywhere," he added, his voice low. "We might need some extra service." I pulled my hand away, my heart pounding. As I walked back to the counter, I could hear them laughing, the sound grating against my nerves. For the next hour, I kept them supplied with coffee, deflecting their increasingly crude comments and wandering hands. The other customers left quickly, casting sympathetic glances my way as they hurried out the door. Soon, it was just me and them. I was refilling their cups for what felt like the 100th time when things took a turn. The man with the scar grabbed my arm again, pulling me close. "You know," he said, his breath hot against my ear, "we're not really here for the coffee." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me," I said, my voice shakier than I'd have liked. He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Or what? You'll call for help," he gestured around the empty diner. "There's no one here but us, sweetheart." That's when I saw it. the glint of metal tucked into his waistband. A gun. My blood ran cold as I realized just how much trouble I was in. Now, he continued, standing up slowly, why don't you be a good girl and open that cash register for us? I backed away, my mind racing. The phone was on the other side of the counter, if I could just reach it, but they were too fast. Two of them vaulted over the counter, cutting off my escape. The others spread out, blocking the exits. I was trapped. Come on, Alice, the scarred man said, reading my name tag. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Open the register, give us the money, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this. I knew he was lying. The look in his eyes told me they had no intention of letting me go. Whatever happened here tonight, they couldn't leave any witnesses. My hands shaking, I moved towards the register. My mind was whirling, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. As I punched in the code to open the drawer, I remembered something. The silent alarm button hidden under the counter. If I could just reach it without them noticing. I opened the register, making a show of gathering the bills. Here, I said, holding out the money. Take it. It's all we have. The scarred man snatched the cash from my hand, quickly counting it. His face darkened. This is it. This is all you've got. I nodded, trying to look scared and helpless. It wasn't hard. Business has been slow. Please, that's everything in the register. He exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication passing between them. Then, without warning, he lashed out, backhanding me across the face. I stumbled, tasting blood. Don't lie to me, he snarled. Where's the rest of it? Where's the safe? I touched my stinging cheek, tears welling in my eyes. There is no safe, I said. I swear that's all we have. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking my head back. Wrong answer, sweetheart. Boys, tear this place apart. Find that safe. The others started ransacking the diner, upending tables and smashing dishes. I watched in horror as they destroyed the place, knowing that each passing minute decreased my chances of making it out of here alive. The scarred man dragged me into the kitchen, throwing me against the industrial refrigerator. Last chance, he growled. Tell me where the safe is, or things are going to get real unpleasant for you. I saw the knife in his hand then, the blade catching the fluorescent light. Terror coursed through me, but with it came a surge of adrenaline. I knew I had to act now, or I'd never get another chance. I pretended to slump and defeat. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll show you. He grinned, victorious. That's more like it. Where is it? Under the counter, I said. There's a hidden panel. He dragged me back out to the main area. Show me, he ordered. I moved behind the counter, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he must be able to hear it. This was it, my one chance. As I knelt down, pretending to reach for a non-existent panel, my hand found the silent alarm button. I pressed it, praying it still worked, praying help would come in time. There's nothing here, the man shouted, realizing he'd been tricked. He grabbed me, spinning me around to face him. The knife was at my throat now, the cold metal pressing against my skin. You lying bitch. I closed my eyes, certain these were my last moments. But then, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't dared to make, I heard it. Sirens in the distance growing louder. The man's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. You, he hissed, you did this. What happened next was a blur of violence and fear. The men panicked, running for the exits. The scarred man made a move as if to drag me with him, but his companions called for him to leave me. In his moment of hesitation, I managed to break free, scrambling over the counter and running for the kitchen. I huddled in the walk-in freezer, shivering not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear shouts, the sound of breaking glass, car engines roaring to life. Then, blessedly, the sound of police sirens right outside the diner. When a police officer finally found me, I was half frozen and in shock. They wrapped me in a blanket and led me out to an ambulance, assuring me that I was safe now. In the days that followed, I learned the full story. The men were part of a gang that had been terrorizing small businesses across 3 states. They'd hit 2 other diners that same night before coming to Mel's. Thanks to my quick thinking with the silent alarm, the police had not only saved me but had managed to apprehend 3 of the 5 men. I'd like to say I went back to work, but I didn't let them win by scaring me away. But the truth is, I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at that diner, all I could see was the glint of a knife. All I could hear were those mocking laughs. I found a new job, working days at a bookstore. But I still have nightmares about that night. Still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling phantom hands grabbing at me, hearing that scarred man's voice in my ear. They caught the other 2 eventually. I had to testify at their trial. Had to relive that night all over again, but seeing them led away in handcuffs, knowing they couldn't hurt anyone else, made it worth it. I'm stronger now in some ways, more cautious in others. And I never, ever work night shifts anymore, because I know now that sometimes the monsters don't hide under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes they walk right through the front door, with smiles too wide and eyes too sharp, ready to turn an ordinary night into a waking nightmare. The first time I tried the door, I thought it was just stuck. The second time I started to worry. By the third time, as the reality of our situation sank in, I knew we were trapped. What had begun as a simple overnight stay at a run-down motel had turned into a claustrophobic nightmare, and I had no idea if we'd make it out alive. My girlfriend Sarah and I had been driving for hours. We were on our way to her sister's wedding, cutting through back roads to avoid highway traffic. It was Sarah's idea, a chance to see some of the country's hidden gems, she'd said. Now, as our eyes strained against the darkness and fatigue set in, I was beginning to regret agreeing to her plan. "We should stop for the night," Sarah said, stifling a yawn. "We're both exhausted." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Next place we see, we'll pull over." That place turned out to be the Pine Grove Motel, a dilapidated establishment that had clearly seen better days. The neon sign flickered weakly, half the letters burnt out, but it was late. We were tired, and neither of us fancied driving any further. The man at the front desk looked like he'd been there since the motel opened. His roomy eyes regarded us with disinterest as he handed over a key attached to a faded plastic fob. "Room 13, he croaked. "End of the row." I hesitated. 13? Don't you have any other rooms available?" He shook his head slowly. 13 feet's all we got. Take it or leave it." Sarah squeezed my hand. "It's fine, babe. We're not superstitious, remember? If only we'd been a little more superstitious. If only we'd listened to that nagging feeling and driven on to the next town. But we were tired, and the lure of a bed, any bed, was too strong to resist. Room 13 was about what you'd expect from a place like this. Faded wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a bathroom that had last been cleaned when Reagan was in office. But it was a place to rest our heads, and that was all we needed. We fell asleep almost immediately, the exhaustion of the day catching up with us. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that things took a turn for the worse. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. In my groggy state, I stumbled towards the door, fumbling with the handle. It didn't budge. Still half asleep, I assumed I was just turning it wrong. I tried again, putting more force into it. Nothing. That's when the first inkling of unease crept in. I blinked, forcing myself to wake up fully. I examined the door handle, tried it again. It was definitely locked, but not from our side. We were locked in. "Sarah," I called, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Sarah, wake up." She stirred, mumbling something incoherent. "What is it?" "The door," I said. "I can't open it. I think we're locked in." That got her attention. She sat up, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, locked in?" I stepped aside, letting her try the door herself. She rattled the handle, then threw her shoulder against the wood. It didn't so much as creak. "This isn't funny," she said, her voice rising. "Let us out." But there was no response from outside, no sound at all. In fact, the silence was oppressive, broken only by our increasingly panicked breathing. We tried the windows next, but they were sealed shut. The glass was too thick to break without making a lot of noise, and even if we did, we were on the second floor. The fall would likely injure us too badly to escape. As the reality of our situation sank in, I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. We were trapped, with no way to call for help. Our phones had no signal. Of course they didn't, not out here in the middle of nowhere. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. "We wait," I said. "Someone will come to clean the room eventually, or maybe check us out. When they do, we'll be ready." But as the hours ticked by, no one came. We shouted ourselves hoarse, pounded on the walls until our hands were bruised. Nothing. It was as if the entire motel had been abandoned, leaving us as the only souls for miles around. The worst part was not knowing why. Were we simply victims of a cruel prank, or was there something more sinister at play? My mind conjured up horrible scenarios: human trafficking, organ harvesting, some sick game where people paid to watch others slowly lose their minds in captivity. As day turned to night again, our situation grew dire. We had no food, and the tap water tasted metallic and wrong. Thirst drove us to drink it anyway, but it left us feeling nauseous and lightheaded. Sarah broke down first. "We're going to die here," she sobbed, curled up on the bed. "No one knows where we are. No one's coming for us." I held her, murmuring reassurances I didn't believe. The truth was, she was right. We'd told no one about our detour, about staying at this God-forsaken motel. For all anyone knew, we were still on our way to the wedding. As the second night wore on, I began to hallucinate. Shadows moved at the corners of my vision, and I could swear I heard voices whispering just beyond the walls. Was it the lack of food, the strange water, or was I simply losing my mind? It was during one of these hallucinatory episodes that I noticed something odd about the ancient TV in the corner. It wasn't plugged in, hadn't been since we arrived. but I could have sworn I saw a flicker of static across its screen. Curious, desperate for any change in our circumstances, I approached it. As I drew closer, the static grew stronger, resolving into a grainy image. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was us, Sarah and I, asleep on the bed. But the angle was wrong, as if the camera was positioned in a corner of the ceiling. With a growing sense of horror, I looked up. There, almost invisible against the textured ceiling wing, was a tiny camera lens. "Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. "We're being watched." She looked up from the bed, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. "What?" I pointed to the camera, then to the TV. Her eyes widened as she made the connection. "Oh God," she whispered. "What is this place?" Before I could respond, the TV screen changed. The image of our room was replaced by text, stark white against a black background. "Welcome to the game," it read. "You have 60 minutes to escape. Fail, and you forfeit your lives. Your time starts now." A timer appeared in the corner of the screen, counting down from 60 mile. For a moment, we just stared, too shocked to move. Then survival instinct kicked in. We tore the room apart, looking for clues, for anything that might lead to our escape. We found cryptic messages hidden in the Bible, a key taped to the bottom of a drawer, a series of numbers scratched into the bathroom mirror that only appeared when fogged up. Each solved puzzle led to another, each solution bringing us closer to freedom. But the clock was ticking, and we were running out of time. With less than a minute left, we finally cracked the last code. The door swung open with an anticlimactic click, revealing an empty hallway beyond. We ran, not stopping until we reached our car. As we peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel stood silent and dark, giving no hint of the horrors it contained. We drove straight to the police, but when they investigated, they found nothing. The motel was abandoned. Had been for years, they said. No cameras, no locked rooms, no evidence of the game we'd been forced to play. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'm back in that room. I'll check the corners for cameras, strain my ears for the sound of a ticking clock. Sarah and I don't talk about it much. Who would believe us? But we know what happened, we know what we survived, and we know that somewhere out there, in some nondescript motel off the beaten path, the game is waiting for its next unwitting players. So take my advice, stick to the main roads, stay in chain hotels, and if you ever find yourself checking into room 13, turn around and drive away as fast as you can. Because once the game begins, there's no guarantee you'll make it out alive. The moment his hand closed around my wrist, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. His smile, once friendly, now seemed predatory, and the pulsing lights of the festival faded into a sickening blur. As he led me away from the crowds, I realized with growing horror that my search for my friends had led me straight into a trap. It was supposed to be the best weekend of the summer. The Starlight Music Festival was legendary, 3 days of non-stop music, art and celebration. My best friends and I had been planning this trip for months, saving every spare dollar and coordinating our outfits with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We danced until our feet ached, sang along to our favorite bands until our voices grew hoarse, and reveled in the electric atmosphere that only a music festival can create. As night fell, the festival grounds transformed into a wonderland of neon lights and pulsating rhythms. It was during a set by our favorite DJ that it happened. One moment, I was dancing between Sarah and Mike, our arms linked as we swayed to the beat. The next, I turned around to find them gone, swallowed up by the surging crowd. At first, I wasn't worried. We'd gotten separated before and had always managed to find each other again. But as one song bled into another and there was still no sign of them, anxiety began to gnaw at my stomach. I pushed my way out of the crowd, scanning faces in the dim light. The festival grounds seemed to have grown impossibly large, a maze of stages, food vendors, and art installations. The press of bodies was overwhelming, the noise deafening. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt small and very alone. That's when he appeared, tall, with a kind face and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He seemed like a lifeline in the chaos. "You look lost," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the music. "Everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, years of stranger danger warnings flashing through my mind. But he looked so normal, so concerned, and I was desperate for help. "I can't find my friends," and I shouted back. "We got separated during the last set." He nodded sympathetically. "That happens a lot here. I'm a volunteer," he added, pointing to a badge I hadn't noticed before. "I can help you find the lost and found tent. They might have gone there to look for you." Relief washed over me. Of course, the lost and found tent. Why hadn't I thought of that? "That would be great," I said. "Thank you so much." He smiled again, and this time I noticed how white his teeth were. How perfect. No problem at all. "It's this way. Follow me." I fell into step beside him as he led me away from the main stage area. The crowds began to thin out, the music fading to a distant thrum. I noticed we were heading towards the outskirts of the festival grounds, where the lighting was sparse and the revelry seemed far away. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, unease creeping back into my voice. "Shortcut," he said breezily. "It's just past these tents here." That's when he grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron, his fingers digging into my skin. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. "Let go of me," I demanded, fear making my voice shrill. His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it now. "Now why would I do that? We're just getting to the fun part," I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that was swallowed up by the distant music and laughter. No one could hear me. No one was coming to help. He started dragging me towards a cluster of dark tents, his free hand clamped over my mouth. I fought with everything I had, kicking and clawing. But it was like fighting against a statue. He was too strong, too prepared. Just as we reached the tents, a voice rang out. "Hey, what's going on over there?" My attacker froze, his head whipping around to locate the source of the voice. It was all the distraction I needed. I bit down hard on the hand covering my mouth, tasting blood. He yelped in pain and his grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my heart pounding in my ears, my lungs burning. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding on the packed earth, his curses growing fainter as I pulled ahead. I burst back into the main festival area, the sudden press of bodies both a relief and a new kind of terror. What if he was still behind me? What if he caught up to me in this crowd? Blind panic drove me forward. I pushed through the throng of dancers, ignoring their annoyed shouts and glares. I had to find security, had to find my friends, had to get away. I don't know how long I ran, or how far. The festival had become a nightmare funhouse. Every smiling face a potential threat. Every shadowy corner hiding unseen dangers. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself near the medical tent. A concerned-looking woman in a Red Cross vest approached me. "Are you all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." The story poured out of me in a rush, my words tumbling over each other in their haste to escape. The woman's face grew grave as she listened, and she quickly ushered me into the tent. What followed was a blur of police statements, medical checkups, and tearful reunions. Sarah and Mike had indeed gone to the lost and found tent, frantic with worry when they couldn't find me. The festival security launched a manhunt for my attacker, but in the chaos and darkness, he had vanished. They found others, though. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that I wasn't the only one who had been targeted. There were other stories, other close calls. My attacker had been part of a larger operation, preying on the lost and vulnerable in the festival crowd. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze. I couldn't bring myself to enjoy the music or the atmosphere, jumping at every sudden movement, every unexpected touch. The magic of the festival had been irreparably tarnished. In the months that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Nightmares plagued my sleep, and crowded places became a source of anxiety rather than excitement. I couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked around every corner, that the next friendly face might hide sinister intentions. Therapy helped, as did the unwavering support of my friends and family. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life, to find joy in the things I once loved. But I never forgot the lesson I learned that night at the Starlight Music Festival. Now, when I go to concerts or festivals, I'm always aware of my surroundings. I keep my friends close, never wander off alone, and trust my instincts when something feels off, because I know firsthand how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare, how easily predators can hide behind a mask of kindness. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my head. I see his too perfect smile, feel the iron grip on my wrist. But then I remind myself that I survived, I got away, and in doing so, I helped expose a dangerous operation and potentially saved others from a similar fate. The Starlight Music Festival continues each year, but I've never gone back. The memories are too raw, too painful, but I hope that my story serves as a warning to others to stay vigilant, to look out for one another, and to remember that even in the brightest of celebrations, darkness can lurk just out of sight, because the truth is, the most dangerous predators aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're right there in plain sight, offering a helping hand and a friendly smile, and it's up to us to recognize the danger before it's too late. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the eerie silence. The second was the half-eaten meals on the tables, as if the entire village had vanished mid-bite. By the time night fell and the shadows began to move, we realized our discovery of this abandoned hamlet was about to become a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day hike through the Appalachian wilderness. Just me and my 4 closest friends, Mike, Sarah, Alex, and Jess, getting away from the hustle of city life and reconnecting with nature. We'd done trips like this before, but nothing could have prepared us for what we stumbled upon on that fateful second day. The morning had started normally enough. We broke camp at dawn, the air crisp and fresh with the promise of adventure. As we hiked, we joked and shared stories, our laughter echoing through the dense forest. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that things took a turn. "Hey guys," Mike called out, squinting at his GPS. "I think we might be off course." We gathered around him, peering at the small screen. According to the map, we should have been in the middle of uncharted forest. Instead, a clearing loomed ahead, barely visible through the trees. Maybe it's just not on the map, Sarah suggested. Could be an old logging camp or something. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. As we emerged from the tree line, what we saw made us stop in our tracks. It wasn't a logging camp, it was a village. Nestled in the heart of the forest was a cluster of buildings that looked like they belonged to another century. Wooden cabins with thatched roofs lined dirt paths, and in the center stood what appeared to be a town square, complete with a well and a small chapel. "This is impossible," Alex breathed, voicing what we were all thinking. "How is this not on any map?" We approached cautiously, calling out greetings, but no one answered. The village was eerily silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As we explored, the sense of wrongness grew. Everything looked lived in, as if the inhabitants had just stepped out moments ago. Laundry still hung on lines, swaying gently. Gardens were well tended, vegetables ripe on the vine, but there wasn't a soul in sight. "Guys," Jess called from one of the cabins, "you need to see this." We crowded into the small dwelling and saw what had caught her attention. The table was set for dinner, plates filled with now moldy food. Chairs were pushed back haphazardly, as if the diners had left in a hurry. "What the hell happened here?" I murmured, a chill running down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. We split up to search the rest of the village, agreeing to meet back in the square in an hour. As I explored, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing there. But the village remained deserted. In one cabin, I found a diary. The last entry was dated just a week ago. It spoke of strange noises in the night, of livestock going missing, of an overwhelming sense of dread. The final words sent a shiver through me. "They're coming." God help us all. When we regrouped, everyone had similar stories. Alex had found more half-eaten meals. Sarah discovered a schoolhouse with lessons still written on the blackboard. Mike had explored the chapel and found it set up for a service that never happened. "We need to leave," Jess said, her voice shaking slightly. "Something bad happened here, and I don't think we want to be around when night falls." But as we turned to go, we realized with growing horror that the sun was already setting. Somehow, hours had passed without us noticing. The forest beyond the village had grown dark and forbidding. "We can't go stumbling through the woods at night," Mike argued. "We'll break our necks." "So what, we stay here," Alex countered, gesturing at the empty village, "in this creepy ghost town." In the end, we didn't have much choice. We chose a cabin near the edge of the village, one with a clear view of the path back to the forest. We barricaded the door and windows as best we could, then settled in for an uneasy night. No one slept. We sat in a tight circle, flashlights at the ready, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. As the hours crawled by, the silence of the village grew oppressive. It was just past midnight when we heard it. A sound so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again, a soft shuffling, like something being dragged across the ground. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We all nodded, too scared to speak. The sound was getting closer, coming from the direction of the village square, and it wasn't alone. Other noises joined it, a low moan, the clatter of something heavy falling, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Lots of footsteps. Jess was the first to peek through a crack in the barricaded window. She recoiled almost immediately, her face pale in the dim light of our flashlights. "Oh God," she breathed. They're people, but not people. Something's wrong with them." One by one, we looked. What we saw defied explanation. Figures moved through the village square, their movements jerky and unnatural. In the moonlight, their skin looked grey and mottled. Some were missing limbs, others had gaping wounds that should have been fatal, but they moved with purpose, searching. "Zombies," Alex whispered incredulously. "Are we seriously dealing with zombies right now?" But we all knew that wasn't quite right. These weren't the mindless, shambling corpses of movies. These things moved with an as we watched, frozen in horror. One of the creatures paused. It turned slowly, its head swiveling until it was facing directly at our cabin. A sound emerged from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but it was a call. And the others answered. "We need to go," I said, already moving to unbarricade the door. "Now!" We burst out of the cabin just as the first of the creatures reached it. The cool night air was filled with their moans, the sound chilling me to my core. We ran, not towards the forest path, but deeper into the village. It was our only chance, to lose them in the maze of buildings and find another way out. What followed was a nightmare of narrow escapes and heart-stopping terror. We darted from shadow to shadow, always just one step ahead of our pursuers. At one point, we got separated. I found myself alone in what looked like a workshop, the sound of those things scratching at the door. I was certain I was going to die there, torn apart by whatever these creatures were, but then I heard Mike's voice calling my name somehow. I found the strength to break a window and climb out, reuniting with my friends just in time to flee from another group of the monsters. As dawn broke, we finally found our way back to the forest path. The creatures seemed unable or unwilling to follow us past the village boundary. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, collapsing in a clearing far from that accursed place. We made it back to civilization, but our story was met with disbelief. When authorities finally investigated, they found no trace of the village. It was as if it had never existed, but in my nightmares, I still hear those moans, still see those grasping hands reaching for me. We never went hiking again after that. How could we, knowing what might be lurking in the untamed wilderness? Sometimes, late at night, I find myself wondering about that village. Where did it come from? What happened to its people? And most chillingly, is it still out there, waiting for more unsuspecting travelers to stumble upon its cursed grounds? I don't have answers. But I know one thing for certain. Some places are meant to remain undiscovered, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because in the depths of the forest, in the shadows of forgotten places, there are horrors beyond imagination. And once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. You can only hope to survive. The moment the lock clicked shut behind us, I knew we were in trouble. The house, once inviting, now felt like a trap. As darkness fell and strange noises echoed through the empty rooms, we realized that what should have been a routine property showing had become a fight for survival. My name's Emma, and I've been a real estate agent for nearly a decade. I've seen my fair share of unusual properties, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. It was supposed to be a simple showing of a Victorian-era mansion on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that usually excites history buffs and restoration enthusiasts. My clients, the Johnsons, were a lovely couple in their mid-30s. looking for their forever home. They'd fallen in love with the photos online and were eager to see the place in person. I'd visited the property once before to get the keys and do a quick walkthrough, but something about it had unsettled me. I chalked it up to the usual creepiness of old, empty houses and thought nothing more of it. We arrived at the mansion just as the sun was starting to set. The fading light cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, making the house look more imposing than I remembered. "Oh, it's perfect," Mrs. Johnson exclaimed as we walked up the creaking porch steps, "just like something out of a Gothic novel. If only we'd known how prophetic those words would turn out to be." The interior of the house was impressive, if a bit musty. High ceilings, intricate woodwork, and huge windows that would let in plenty of light during the day. But as we moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "And this," I said, pushing open a heavy oak door, "is the master bedroom." As we stepped inside, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind us. We all jumped, then laughed nervously. "Old houses, you know," Mr. Johnson said with a forced chuckle, always full of surprises. We continued the tour, making our way up to the 3rd floor. That's when things started to get weird. As we entered what looked like an old study, the temperature dropped noticeably. Mrs. Johnson shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Is there a draft in here?" she asked. Before I could answer, we heard it. A low, mournful sound, like someone crying. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. What was that? "Mr. Johnson asked, his voice tight with tension. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "These old houses make all sorts of noises." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the wind. It sounded too human. We decided to cut the tour short and head back downstairs. That's when we realized we were trapped. Every door we tried was locked, including the front door we'd come in through. Even the windows wouldn't budge. "This isn't funny, Emma," Mrs. Johnson said, panic edging into her voice. "Let us out." "I'm not doing this," I insisted, my own fear rising. "I don't know what's happening." As if in response, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Mrs. Johnson screamed, and I felt Mr. Johnson grab my arm. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "There has to be a key or something." We used our phone flashlights to search the house, looking for anything that might help us escape. But as we moved from room to room, it became clear that we weren't alone. Shadows moved at the edge of our vision, disappearing when we turned to look. That crying sound grew louder, sometimes right behind us, sometimes far away. In the kitchen, we found an old rotary phone. To our surprise, it had a dial tone. I quickly dialed 911, hope surging through me. 911, "What's your emergency?" A calm voice answered. "Please, we're trapped in a house at 1313 Oakwood Lane," I said in a rush. "The doors are locked. We can't get out." "There's something here with us." There was a pause, then the operator spoke again. But it wasn't the same voice. This one was deep, distorted, barely human. "No one's coming to help you," it growled. "You belong to the house now." The line went dead. We stared at each other in horror, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were on our own. As the night wore on, the house seemed to come alive around us. Doors slammed on their own. Objects moved when we weren't looking. And always, that crying sound, sometimes turning into screams that made our blood run cold. We huddled together in the living room, too scared to separate. Mrs. Johnson was praying quietly, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Johnson kept trying to break a window with a fireplace poker, but the glass wouldn't even crack. Around midnight, things escalated. A chair flew across the room, narrowly missing Mr. Johnson's head. Books launched themselves off shelves, and then we saw it. A figure, translucent and glowing faintly, hovering at the top of the stairs. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Her face was twisted in a mask of sorrow and rage. When she spoke, it was the same distorted voice we'd heard on the phone. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "No one ever leaves." She floated down the stairs, other ghostly figures emerging from the walls to join her. They surrounded us, their cold presence making it hard to breathe. In that moment, I remembered something I'd read in the property history but had dismissed as local legend. The house had once belonged to a wealthy family in the 1800s. The daughter had fallen in love with a man her parents didn't approve of. They'd locked her in the attic until she agreed to marry someone else. Instead, she'd taken her own life. "I'm sorry," I said, addressing the ghost directly. "What happened to you was terrible, but we're not the ones who hurt you. Please let us go." The ghost paused, her form flickering. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity in her eyes. "It's too late," she whispered. "We're all trapped here, forever." But something had changed. The other ghosts were retreating, fading into the walls. The main ghost, the daughter, I realized, remained. "There is a way," she said, her voice sounding more human now. "In the attic, my room. Find what was taken from me." With that, she vanished. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, and we heard a click. The attic door had unlocked. We raced up the stairs, hope giving us new energy. The attic was dusty and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner was a small room, more of a cell, really. And there, on a decaying vanity, we saw it, a locket, tarnished with age. As soon as Mrs. Johnson picked it up, the house shuddered. We heard a sound like 1,000 voices sighing in relief. The front door swung open, and the first light of dawn spilled into the hallway. We didn't hesitate. We ran out of that house as fast as our legs could carry us, not stopping until we reached my car. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the ghost girl standing on the porch, smiling. Then she was gone, and the house was just a house again. We never spoke publicly about what happened that night. Who would believe us? The police report simply stated that we'd been accidentally locked in due to a faulty mechanism. The house was eventually torn down, the land turned into a park. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that crying sound in my dreams. And I wonder about the ghost girl and all the others trapped in that house. Did we really free them? Or are they still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors to walk through the door? I don't show old houses anymore. The risk is too great, because now I know that some properties come with a history that can't be seen in photos or disclosed in paperwork. Some houses are more than just buildings. They're prisons for lost souls, waiting for a chance to escape, or to pull others in to share their eternal torment. So if you're ever house hunting, and you come across a place that seems too good to be true, a beautiful old mansion with a surprisingly low price tag. Think twice before you step inside, because you never know what might be waiting for you. And once those doors lock behind you, there's no guarantee you'll ever come out again. The first impact jolted us out of our casual conversation. The second sent us skidding towards the ditch. By the third, as our car rolled off the road, I knew this was no accident. Someone wanted us off this lonely stretch of highway, and they didn't care if we survived the fall. It was supposed to be a fun family road trip. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Emma, 10, and Jack, 8, and I had been planning this vacation for months. We'd mapped out a route through some of the most beautiful parts of the country, with plenty of stops at quirky roadside attractions to keep the kids entertained. We'd been on the road for 3 days, and everything had been going great. The kids were getting along better than usual, probably thanks to the excitement of the trip. Lisa and I were enjoying the chance to spend some uninterrupted time together, sharing the driving and rediscovering why we'd fallen in love in the first place. That fateful evening, we were on a lonely stretch of highway cutting through dense forest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I was behind the wheel, with Lisa dozing in the passenger seat. The kids were in the back, Emma reading a book and Jack playing on his handheld game. I first noticed the car in my rearview mirror about an hour before sunset. It was a dark sedan, nondescript except for how fast it was approaching. I moved over to let it pass, but it just stayed behind us, uncomfortably close. "That guy's riding our tail," I said to Lisa, who had woken up and was stretching. She glanced back and frowned. "Maybe he's in a hurry." "There's a rest stop coming up in a few miles. We can pull over and let him pass," I nodded, keeping an eye on the car behind us. But as we approached the rest stop, the car suddenly accelerated, swerving into the oncoming lane and pulling up beside us. That's when the first impact came. The sedan slammed into our side, the sound of crunching metal filling the air. The kids screamed in the back seat as I fought to keep control of the car. "What the hell?" I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "Is he crazy?" Before Lisa could respond, the car hit us again, harder this time. We skidded towards the edge of the road, tires squealing as I desperately tried to steer us back on course. The third hit sent us over the edge. The world spun as our car rolled down the embankment. I heard the crunch of metal, the shattering of glass, the terrified screams of my family. Then, everything went black. I came to hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. The car was on its roof, the windshield shattered. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Emma crying, "Lisa." I croaked, turning my head. My wife was next to me, unconscious but breathing. "Emma? Jack? Daddy?" Emma's voice came from the back, shaky and scared. "I'm okay, but Jack won't wake up." Fear gripped my heart. I fumbled with my seatbelt, falling awkwardly as it released. Ignoring the pain shooting through my body, I twisted around to check on the kids. Emma was already unbuckled, a cut on her forehead, but otherwise seeming okay. Jack was slumped in his seat, a nasty bruise forming on his temple. But he was breathing, and when I checked, his pulse was strong. "We need to get out of here," I said, more to myself than to Emma. "Can you unbuckle Jack while I help Mummy?" Emma nodded bravely, her hands shaking as she reached for her brother's seatbelt. I turned back to Lisa, gently shaking her. "Lisa, honey, wake up. We need to move." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion quickly turning to fear as she took in our situation. "The kids?" she asked immediately. "They're okay," I assured her. "But we need to get out of the car. That guy might come back." As if on cue, we heard the sound of a car engine approaching. Panic surged through me. I helped Lisa with her seatbelt, then turned to help Emma with Jack. Together we managed to drag ourselves out of the wreckage. We were at the bottom of a steep embankment, the forest dark and imposing around us. Up on the road, I could see headlights approaching slowly. "Into the trees," I whispered urgently. "We need to hide." Lisa took Emma's hand while I carried Jack, who was starting to stir. We stumbled into the forest, the undergrowth scratching at our legs as we pushed through. Behind us, I heard a car door slam, then footsteps crunching on gravel. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness when I'm sweeping over our wrecked car. "I know you're out there," a man's voice called out, sounding almost gleeful. "Come on out and make this easy on yourselves." We pressed ourselves against a large tree, hardly daring to breathe. Jack had woken up fully now, and I could feel him trembling in my arms. I put a finger to my lips, silently urging him to stay quiet. The flashlight beam came closer, sweeping back and forth through the trees. I could hear the man muttering to himself, leaves crunching under his feet as he searched. "Found your phone?" he called out. "No service out here. No one's coming to help you." My heart sank. He was right. We were miles from the nearest town, with no way to call for help. We were on our own. The sound of his footsteps faded as he moved further into the forest. I turned to Lisa, speaking in a whisper. "We need to move, head deeper into the forest, try to circle back to the road further down." She nodded, her face pale in the moonlight. We set off as quietly as we could, every snapping twig sounding like a gunshot in the silent forest. We walked for what felt like hours, the kids growing tired and scared. Jack was able to walk on his own now, but he clung to my hand like a lifeline. Emma was being incredibly brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Just when I thought we might have lost our pursuer, we heard it, the rev of an engine, closer than it should have been. Headlights cut through the trees ahead of us. "He's on a road," Lisa gasped. "He's trying to cut us off." We changed direction, pushing through denser undergrowth. The sound of the engine faded, then grew loud again as he turned onto another road. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with us as the mice. Every time we thought we were making progress, the sound of that engine would reach us, forcing us to change course. As dawn began to break, we finally stumbled onto a paved road, but it wasn't the highway we'd been driven off. This was a smaller, local road. "Look," Emma pointed down the road. In the distance, we could see buildings, a small town. Hope surged through us, giving us a second wind. We started down the road, moving as fast as our exhausted bodies would allow. That's when we heard it, the now familiar sound of an engine approaching. Headlights appeared around a bend behind us. "Run!" I shouted, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We ran, the kids finding energy they didn't know they had. The car behind us accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. Just as I thought it was over, that we'd come so far only to be caught at the last moment, another set of headlights appeared ahead of us. A police cruiser rounded the corner, its lights flashing as it sped towards us. The car behind us screeched to a halt, then reversed quickly, disappearing back the way it had come. The police car pulled up beside us, the officer inside looking at us with concern. "Are you folks all right?" he asked, taking in our battered, exhausted appearance. The story poured out of us in a rush. The officer called for backup and an ambulance, assuring us that we were safe now. In the days that followed, as we recovered in the hospital and gave statements to the police, we learned the full story. Our attacker was a serial killer who had been targeting families on remote highways for years. Thanks to our escape and description, they were able to track him down and arrest him. We never did finish that road trip, but we did gain a new appreciation for life, for family, and for the strength we all had inside us. Now, when we travel, we stick to busier roads and well-populated areas. And we always keep an eye on the rearview mirror, watching for cars that get too close. Because we learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones hiding in the forest. Sometimes they're right there on the road with you, just waiting for the right moment to strike. The first anonymous note was easy to dismiss as a prank. The second made my stomach churn with unease. By the third, as I stared at the words, "Keep quiet, or else," I knew that my discovery at the disaster relief site had put my life in danger. What had started as a simple volunteer effort had turned into a nightmare of corruption and threats, and I was in way over my head. My name is Alex, and I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of a conspiracy. I'm just an ordinary guy who wanted to help out after a devastating hurricane hit our coast. The destruction was heart-wrenching. Homes reduced to splinters, entire communities underwater, and thousands of people displaced. When the call went out for volunteers, I didn't hesitate to sign up. The relief center was a hive of activity from the moment I arrived. Trucks loaded with supplies rolled in constantly, and a small army of volunteers worked tirelessly to sort and distribute food, water, and other essentials. I threw myself into the work, grateful for the chance to make a difference. It was during my second week that I first noticed something odd. I was helping to unload a truck of bottled water when I overheard two of the site managers arguing in hushed tones. The numbers don't add up. One of them hissed, "We're short almost a third of what was supposed to be here." The other man grabbed his arm, eyes darting around nervously. "Keep your voice down, we'll deal with it later." They noticed me then and quickly separated, plastering on fake smiles. I pretended I hadn't heard anything, but the exchange stuck with me. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed discrepancies between the supplies that were logged as received and what actually made it to the distribution area. Boxes of expensive medical supplies would arrive, only to disappear before they could be handed out. Even some of the monetary donations seemed to be vanishing into thin air. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe I was misunderstanding something about how relief efforts worked. But the more I saw, the more certain I became that something was very wrong. I decided to do some digging. Late one night, after most of the other volunteers had left, I snuck into the main office. What I found there made my blood run cold. Hidden behind a false panel in one of the filing cabinets was a ledger. It detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of supplies and cash that had been diverted, stolen from the relief efforts. My hands shook as I took photos of the ledger with my phone. I knew I had to report this. But to whom? The local authorities were stretched thin dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane. And what if they were in on it too? I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching. I barely had time to replace the ledger and duck out of sight before the door opened. Through a crack in the cabinet I was hiding in, I saw two men enter. The site manager and someone I didn't recognize. dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the relief center. "The boss isn't happy," suit guy said, his voice cold. "We're not meeting our quotas." The site manager wrung his hands nervously. "It's getting harder to hide the shortages. Some of the volunteers are asking questions." "Then get rid of them," suit guy snapped. "We can't afford any loose ends." They left shortly after, but I stayed hidden for what felt like hours. My heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. When I finally crept out of the office and back to my quarters, my mind was reeling. This was bigger than I had imagined, and far more dangerous. The next morning, I found the first note tucked under my door. "We know what you saw. Stay quiet and walk away." I crumpled it up, telling myself it was just a coincidence, a prank by one of the other volunteers. But then came the second note, this one pinned to my pillow. "Last warning, forget what you found or suffer the consequences." The threat was clear, and fear coiled in my gut. They knew. Somehow, they knew I had been in that office. I wanted to leave, to run as far from this place as I could. But how could I abandon the people who genuinely needed help? And how could I live with myself if I let these criminals continue to steal from those who had already lost so much? I decided to gather more evidence. Using my phone, I secretly recorded conversations, took photos of suspicious shipments, and made copies of incriminating documents. All the while, I felt eyes on me, watching my every move. The third note appeared in my bag during lunch. "Keep quiet, or else." This time, it was accompanied by a photo of my family back home. The message was clear. They could get to me, and they could get to those I loved. That night, as I lay awake wrestling with what to do, I heard a commotion outside. Peering out my window, I saw several men loading boxes into an unmarked van. I recognized those boxes. They were supposed to contain vital medications for a nearby shelter. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and started recording. I had to get proof, something concrete I could take to the authorities. I crept outside, using the shadows for cover as I tried to get a clearer shot. I was so focused on the men at the van that I didn't notice someone approaching from behind until it was too late. A hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my startled cry. "You should have listened to the warnings." A voice growled in my ear. I was dragged away from the scene, my heart racing as I realized this might be the end. They took me to a secluded area behind one of the storage tents. 3 men surrounded me, the site manager, suit guy from the office, and a burly man I'd seen working security. "We gave you every chance to walk away," suit guy said, his tone almost conversational. "But you just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? People are suffering," I spat back, finding a courage I didn't know I had. "You're stealing from those who have nothing left." The site manager at least had the decency to look ashamed, but suit guy just laughed. "It's business, kid, nothing personal." But now, well, now it is personal. He nodded to the security guy, who cracked his knuckles ominously. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow. But it never came. Instead, I heard shouts and the sound of running feet. I opened my eyes to see a group of people rushing towards us. Other volunteers, led by Sarah, one of the team leaders I'd grown close to over the past weeks. "Alex, are you okay?" Sarah called out as she reached us. She turned to suit guy, her eyes blazing. "We heard everything. It's over. The police are on their way." It turned out I wasn't the only one who had noticed something was wrong. Sarah and a few others had been conducting their own investigation. When they saw me being dragged away, they followed, recording everything on their phones. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and media cameras. The scale of the corruption was staggering. Millions of dollars worth of aid had been stolen, not just from our site, but from relief efforts all along the coast. In the days that followed what followed, as the story broke nationwide, I struggled with a mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was out, guilt that I hadn't acted sooner, fear of retaliation. But mostly, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I stayed on at the relief center, helping to rebuild not just the community, but also the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. Many people were angry, feeling betrayed by those who were supposed to help them. But slowly, as legitimate aid began flowing in and real progress was made, hope began to return. I learned a lot from this experience, about the depths of human greed, yes, but also about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's scary, about the importance of trusting your instincts and not being afraid to ask questions, and about the incredible impact a group of dedicated people can have when they work together for a common cause. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure or find another threatening note. The fear may never fully go away, but I know I did the right thing. And if I had to do it all over again, even knowing the danger, I wouldn't change a thing. Because in the face of disaster, whether it's a natural catastrophe or human corruption, staying silent is never the answer. It's up to each of us to speak up, to fight for what's right, and to help those in need. That's the real essence of disaster relief, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The first twig snap could have been a deer, the second might have been the wind, but when I heard the third, followed by heavy breathing just outside our cabin window, I knew with chilling certainty that our weekend getaway had become a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. My best friend Jake had found an amazing deal on a remote cabin rental nestled deep in the mountains. Just what we need, he'd said. A break from the city, no cell phones, no internet, just nature and good company. Our group of 5, Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, our friends Mike and Lisa, and myself, had jumped at the chance. The drive up was beautiful, winding mountain roads framed by towering pines and breathtaking vistas. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small clearing where the cabin stood. It was rustic but charming, with a wide porch and large windows that promised amazing views come morning. We spent that first evening settling in, unpacking our supplies and exploring the cabin. There were 3 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen stocked with all the basics. After a simple dinner of pasta and wine, we gathered around the fire pit outside, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under a canopy of stars. It wasn't until we were heading to bed that I first felt a twinge of unease. As I was closing the curtains in my room, I could have sworn I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a shadow darker than the surrounding night that seemed to shift and disappear as soon as I focused on it. I shook it off as imagination, fueled by one too many ghost stories around the fire. The next day dawned bright and clear. We spent it hiking the nearby trails, marveling at waterfalls and hidden meadows bursting with wildflowers. By the time we returned to the cabin, we were pleasantly exhausted and looking forward to another quiet evening. That's when things started to feel off. Small things at first. A chair on the porch that wasn't where we'd left it, A window we were sure we'd closed found wide open. Our firewood pile, neatly stacked that morning, now scattered as if something had crashed through it. "Probably just animals," Mike said with a shrug. "Bears, maybe?" We all nodded, eager to accept this rational explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As night fell, the feeling intensified. We were in the living room, playing a board game by firelight, when the first twigs snapped outside. We all froze, looking at each other with nervous smiles. "Just the wind," Sarah said, but her voice trembled slightly. A few minutes later, another snap, closer this time. Jake got up to look out the window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. "I don't see anything," he said. But he double-checked the lock on the door as he sat back down. We tried to return to our game, but the mood had shifted. Every creak of the cabin's old wood, every gust of wind outside, sent shivers down my spine. That's when we heard it, heavy breathing, just outside the living room window. It was too loud, too close to be anything but intentional. Lisa screamed, dropping her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed. For a long moment, we all sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Then, slowly, deliberately, something started scratching at the window. "We need to get out of here," I whispered urgently. Mike shook his head. The car's on the other side of the clearing. We'd never make it. He was right. Whatever was out there, it was between us and our only means of escape. "The bedrooms," Sarah suggested, her voice shaking. "We can barricade ourselves in." It seemed like our only option. We moved as quietly as we could, grabbing anything that might serve as a weapon: fireplace pokers, heavy flashlights, a kitchen knife. We chose the largest bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser in front of the door once we were all inside. "What do they want?" Lisa asked, tears streaming down her face. Nobody had an answer. We huddled together in the center of the room, listening to the sounds of movement outside, footsteps on the porch, the creak of floorboards in the living room. They were inside the cabin now. Hours passed like this, each sound from beyond our barricaded door sending fresh waves of terror through us. We took turns watching, trying to stay alert despite our exhaustion. It was during my watch, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, that I heard it, a new sound, different from the others, a rhythmic thumping, growing louder. "Guys," I hissed, shaking the others awake, "listen." As we strained our ears, the sound resolved into something recognizable: helicopter blades. Hope surged through me. Someone had found us. We were saved. But our elation was short-lived. From just outside our door came an animalistic growl, followed by the splintering of wood. Whatever was out there knew its time was running out, and it was making one last desperate attempt to get to us. The dresser shuddered as something heavy slammed into the door. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, weapons raised, ready for a final stand. The door burst open with a crash, the dresser toppling over, and there, framed in the doorway, was a figure that defied explanation. It was human in shape, but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over protruding bones. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, noseless, with sunken cheeks and eyes that glowed with an unholy, hungry light. For a heartbeat, we all stared at each other in horrified silence. Then the creature let out an unearthly shriek and lunged towards us. What happened next was chaos. We fought with a desperation born of sheer terror. I swung the fireplace poker wildly, feeling it connect with something solid. Sarah and Lisa were screaming. Jake had tackled the thing, wrestling with it on the floor, and then, suddenly, it was over. A deafening explosion filled the room as Mike fired the flare gun we'd found in the emergency kit. The creature howled in pain, its skin smoldering where the flare had struck it. It scrambled backwards, out the door and down the hall. We heard the sound of breaking glass, and then silence. We didn't dare move until we heard voices outside, human voices calling out, park rangers drawn by the helicopter we'd heard earlier. Apparently, the cabin's owners had called them when we failed to check out on time. The rangers found us huddled in the bedroom, wild-eyed and babbling about monsters in the woods. They were skeptical at first, but the state of the cabin, the broken windows, the claw marks on the walls, was hard to explain away. A search of the surrounding forest turned up nothing, save for some strange tracks leading deep into the mountains. The official report blamed our experience on a bear attack, fueled by group hysteria and too much alcohol. But we knew the truth. In the years that followed, we researched obsessively, trying to make sense of what we'd encountered. We found old legends of mountain demons, stories of hikers gone missing in those same woods. Nothing concrete, but enough to convince us that we weren't crazy. We never went back to those mountains. How could we, knowing what lurked in their shadowy depths? But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself thinking about that cabin, about the creature with the glowing eyes and hungry smile, and I wonder, is it still out there, waiting in the darkness, watching, hungry, for the next group of unsuspecting vacationers to stumble into its territory? I hope not. But I keep my doors locked, just in case, because I know now that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in our imaginations. Sometimes they're all too real, hiding just beyond the reach of our campfire's light, waiting for their chance to strike. So, if you're ever planning a trip to a remote cabin in the woods, remember our story. Keep your eyes open, your wits about you, and maybe, just maybe, bring a flare gun. Because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting for its chance to pounce.